2023. We will call this meeting of the Public Health, Safety, and Resources Committee to order. And I will ask the clerk to call the roll, which will be pretty brief.
Supervisor McCowan?
Here.
Chair Hamburg?
Here, thank you very much. And item number 2 is our action items for today. And the first item on the agenda is the Class K discussion. And I'll ask Michael Lockett, our Chief Building Inspector, to come up. I know there's a few people here. We, I just want to note, I think we had 29 separate items of correspondence that are in our packets. And I think probably the building inspector has had a chance to review those as well. So I think I'll just turn it over to you, Michael, sort of say where we are in this process right now.
Honorable board members, in the process we have taken the Marion County code and we're recalibrating it to look like an ordinance from Mendocino County. And some of the items that I have got from the last meeting were limitations on square footage, a minimum of 3 years for residency, the straw bale construction, work living quarters, and parcel size increase up to 5 acres.
And there was also something about notation on the deed.
Notation on the deeds that it'd be a Class K structure.
And is that notation, I can't remember exactly, is that at the time that the building is signed off, or is that the time that the permit is taken out?
As far as I know, is that it gets deeded once the building's final.
Once the building is final. Yeah, Supervisor.
We often have the case where people don't get their permits filed.
That is correct. And that, maybe we should do that on the upfront end of it.
And I'm getting a nod from, I forget
From
your
Adrian.
title. Adrian, your title is?
Administrative Services Manager.
From the Planning and Building Services Administrative Services Manager.
So we could do that at the point at which the building permit is taken out. There would be a notation made. Adrian, is that what you're? Yeah, maybe you should come up just so we keep all this official.
Good morning, Adrian Thompson, Planning and Building Services. Yes, when the applicant comes in or the property owner, as Class K would require the owner, they will bring an original deed to the department. We can take that deed and record it, if you wish, as a deed restriction or as a note. Currently, it's a note, but I know that we've been discussing potentially a 3-year deed restriction.
The deed restriction is, has more
more teeth.
More easily discoverable, I think.
Yeah, I think it has more teeth in the matter also for enforcement.
Because it would automatically come up at a title search.
Title searches for when they sell. Not only that, if it's issued, we're not missing those people who wait 10 years to get a final.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so does any of our, Michael, do you agree with that makes more sense?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, I think we kind of have consensus on that one. Thank you. I did notice, well, more than notice, I know that there was a environmental health stakeholders meeting a couple of weeks ago. I know Mr. Howard was there. I know Scott Miller was there. We got kind of a lengthy note from Anna Burkus. Did you have a chance to look at that, Michael?
I didn't. And there was a letter or an email?
It was an email.
It's part of the packet.
It's in our correspondence binder. And I'm just wondering, because we touched a little bit on EH concerns with respect to pit privies on 10-acre minimums. Yep. And we got a little bit into the composting privies, but it seemed like at that stakeholder meeting, Scott Miller, who spent many years working for the county, sort of surprised I don't see him today, was going to do some research with water quality to see what the current state of regulations were. But does that bear directly on the discussions before this committee?
Yeah, I did go over and talk to EH about the composting toilets.
Uh-huh.
And they said that was they could do that, but they're gonna have to still put in a septic system. But they have to have a 10-acre minimum.
Okay, so a 10-acre minimum, you can do a composting toilet, but you also have to have a septic system.
Correct.
Okay. And what about the pit privy option? That is,
And
I think we have someone to speak to that. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Trey Strickland with Environmental Health.
Good morning, Trey.
Dave Jensen spoke with Charles Reed recently with the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. And Charles Reed concurred that pit privies and outhouses are not allowed under their new regulations.
Okay. Regardless of parcel size.
Regardless of parcel size. Charles Reed did refer the question to Sacramento to see if we can get a special allowance for larger rural sites.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the issue that Scott Miller brought up was, a site up in the hills in Covelo, if someone has a couple hundred acres, why couldn't he have an outhouse?
Yeah.
But currently they're not allowed under the basin plan.
Okay. Now, yeah, I'm sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
also what is very common are hunting camps typically will,
Right.
or, other family recreation where they're only up there certain times of the year for limited time. It's very common to have an outhouse.
Sure.
Or a composting toilet without a septic system, I
Yeah.
would think.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
just-
we know they're out there for sure.
So I think this is something where a rule made in Sacramento makes a lot of sense in Sacramento, and it really doesn't apply in a rural area. And people are not going to stop doing this.
Right.
But now they're doing it without any criteria.
Right, but if it's not allowed in the basin plan, then we don't have any
Right.
authority to issue a permit for it.
Right.
And the same thing about the composting toilet without the septic.
Yeah,
That's a requirement under the basin plan.
we have a meeting this week to address ADA bathrooms and greenhouses. That's a high priority for us to resolve right now. But we're also going to have a second working group to address the topics of composting toilets and gray water and other alternative waste disposal options. So we'll.
So I guess one of the things I'm thinking is how do those considerations get melded into these new Class K regulations?
Yeah, that I'm not familiar with. I don't have an answer. for
Michael,
that.
do you have any thought about that?
Um,
Because we're talking about the same kind of thing, although the hunting cabins that Supervisor McCowan brought up, I agree with him. Those are just going to happen. And if we don't account for them in the plan, it's not going to make a whit of difference.
No, yeah, those are, and they're only used, rarely, I'm assuming, so.
Yeah,
Frankly, a lot of times it's not even a cabin,
yeah. But, but I just to speak to my own experience, 30 years ago, when I built built a place on Boonville Road, I wanted to put a composting toilet, and I was required to also do a septic system. And I went, why do I have to do this? And they said, well, at some point, it's typical that people will start with a composting toilet, but at some point they're going to want to change over for whatever reason. And it was a wise thing because, sure enough, that occurred.
That occurred?
Yeah, I mean, we still use the composting toilet in an outbuilding, but so it makes sense, is what I'm saying. My own experience bears it out.
I'll find out when those meetings are and attend with the H.
Okay, thank you. So, I'm not sure where my colleague wants to go. I know I do want to talk more about the parcel size and about the square footage issue. I know at the last meeting, we talked in terms of a 5-acre parcel size limitation. I would like to leave it at the 1-acre parcel size. That's largely because of a strong amount of input from the coast, from
Sure.
everybody from real estate brokers to architects to contractors. Everybody seemed to think that 1 acre has become very commonly used on the coast and that it is not presenting any serious problems, and that not allowing K on 1 acre would be impinging on an already horribly tight housing market over there. And so that, that's where I stand on that issue. And then with regard to the limitation on square footage, I'm somewhere, but I think we talked about 2. I got a lot of pushback on that. Not pushback, but a lot of input that we should be somewhat more lenient. I don't think we should go to, I've had people advocating all the way up to 4,000. I think that's a little bit more than we should go to, but I'm somewhere between 25 and 3 is what I would like to allow. And I think my colleague was in favor of 2. Is that right?
Well, I think I might have been in favor of 15, and 2
Okay.
was a compromise,
Okay.
possibly.
So, so I might be able to compromise at 25.
25?
But, we're just gonna make,
Well, let's-
we're just gonna make a recommendation to the board, so, whether this committee can come to a, we can make, this committee can also make 2 alternate recommendations and let the full board decide whether they think it should be 2 or 25 or whatever. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I think what we're doing today is we're giving further direction to staff with the hope that they'll return in June with a draft ordinance.
Correct.
And then at that point, we would make a recommendation onto the full board. And, I kind of think we'll probably come together on something that
Yeah.
we can recommend.
I hope so.
But, and I will have some comments, but maybe we should go to the public first.
Yeah, that sounds good. Anyone in the public? Mr. Howard?
Good morning, Supervisor
I'm a little
Lee
bit
Howard.
surprised that you're the only member.
Pardon?
I'm a little surprised you're the only member of the public here, given the amount of,
Right, the
input.
amount of
And I did rem-
feedback both ways.
and I
mean,
did remind everybody that I communicated with that we were gonna have this hearing this morning, but I guess a lot of those people
Oh,
actually.
we'll wait till the Board of Supervisors meeting.
Well, maybe that'll happen.
Oh,
But given the amount of interest there was out there,
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised we don't
I
have more
received
this morning.
dozens and dozens of, like you did, of emails regarding the issue, and yet when I started talking to some of them, I don't think it quite goes the way that they want. I want to start off by saying that, I think this is a learning experience, and I just heard let me back on to the septic and that portion of it, and to not stand up here and tell you that we have the basin plan, but we have the lamp that is coming your way as far as septics and that whole thing. It is my thought that that's where this septic needs to go, is into the lamp, because you're going to be adopting that in the next few months here for the regional board and sending it to them. That's the place that I would say that discussion should occur. I don't know if Dave Jensen is still with the county or is he's gone. I'm surprised that he isn't here, because he could address that very rapidly. But
We
and
do
s-
have excuse me, Lee, we do have an email from him this morning saying he's working in Fort Bragg today.
That's too bad.
Last time the standing committee had a meeting to discuss Class K, Scott Miller made an issue about outhouses. It would be wise if one or both of you sat in on the Class K discussion. You'll be only one part of the meeting. I'm not sure who this was sent to. Yeah.
Supervisor
Yeah.
Hamburg, this was sent to myself and Kit Elliott this morning.
Oh, okay.
And when we started talking about this, Nicole gave you copies. So I don't know if there are copies in the back of the room.
No, there
But I
isn't.
could give Mr. Howard a copy. And also, I don't know if Michael Lockett has a copy. So,
Thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lee.
Well, it just, the simple fact was that Scott was pretty adamant. No, I agree with him. I think that it's, especially if you have a 200-acre parcel out there, or a 1,000-acre parcel, but the state has seen fit to try to carve us down again and do it. But the LAMP would be the place, in my opinion, to enter this discussion. So with that being said, I'll move on. You know, the fire safe standards, again, from the Builders Exchange point of view, we came with this thing as health and safety, like we normally do. And that the fire safe standards were adopted back in 2003, all the way up to 8, finally implemented into the thing. A lot of the counties have a current, in their county regs, fire safe standards. Placer, Marin, Sonoma, Shasta, and several others. If they don't, most of the time they don't have alternative construction standards. They're using straight out of UBC. And Michael and I had discussions about enforcement of the fire safe standards and where we're at with the fire safe standards. The part of the problem that you have is that the Class K as we have it right now totally ignore the fire safe standards completely. There are no requirements regarding fire safe standards. Maybe the county, because they want to do lesser, should adopt a copy or some form of the fire safe standards to mitigate and designate what they're going to be looking at, because that's where we get into the problem with this. If we continue to build, and I hear you and John on size, I hear you on acreage. If we continue to build 1-acre parcels, even on the coast, it raises the exposure. There's no two ways about that. We're not opposed to that, to the size. We're just saying that if you're going to do it, let's not design it for a disaster. Now, I'm surprised that we have virtually no input from the chiefs or the fire districts. They're the ones that are going to enforce this. And that comes the next problem, that most of the fire people out there aren't enforcing any of the codes and don't have to. And it turns to the county to be the enforcement mechanism for it, whether it's hardening of the buildings, addresses, sprinklers, water supplies, ingress and egress. And just to let you know, CDF doesn't see him unless I'm missing, but CDF isn't in the room today either. And they're the ones that are enforcing SRA in state responsible areas. The local jurisdiction, and it turns to Michael, evidently, to do the enforcement for fire under Chapter 9 and the fire safe standards by the state, it becomes a county responsibility. So if you let these things go and don't make any of the requirements, what happens when we have a major incident and it burns down the guy that met all the fire safe standards, and the guy that didn't meet the fire safe standards, his house is the one that's caused the problem? So that's part of my concern in that. what happens after the 3-year living requirement? That isn't answered. I would hope that someplace along the line, that house isn't going to go away. It isn't going to change just because 3 years is up. So it turns into a rental. That isn't what the plan was made for, Dan. You and I both know that. The deed requirements that you were talking about, the way we're saying, is already in it. That's the language that the deed gets filed when the permit is taken out. That's the current language in the book. Again, the lamp would be a good way to shake this thing out as far as the septic. And the acreage size, whatever, we don't have any thoughts on that.
Okay.
Other than that, we definitely have had a dialogue that has started here, and I think so far it's been a good dialogue on where we're going and what we're going to end up with as far as the bottom line on this. I gave you the state's fire safe standards with some information in it. I hope you get a chance to look at it. I'll give Michael a copy also. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I would like to ask the building inspector to respond on the fire safe standards issue. I know there are specific measures within the fire safe standards that you believe should be applied to K, having to do with siding, roofing, venting, at least those 3 items you've mentioned to me. But do you believe that is an adequate amount of regulation without going as far as some of these other counties have gone, such as Marin and Sonoma, which have adopted the fire safe standards in toto?
Yeah, in total. I was just trying to look at the intent of the Class K as it was previously written and the way it's going to be written now, that there's some type of fire-resistant construction in these structures, at least the exterior. I would like to see the exterior walls be ignition resistant, the Class A roof covering, the ventings that are up on the rooftop that are not going to allow embers to go into the attics. I don't know how much the tempered glass is going to work, how much it works for the fire safe standards. So I'm some of these folks that are using alternative methods to build these houses. The thing that I have heard from them is, which would be a constant if it's just the owner builder, is where do I get these type of windows that are tempered glass and that kind of stuff. They understand the hardy siding and stuff and the venting. That's kind of where I went, and no fire sprinklers.
Mm. And the other issue that Mr. Howard raised, which I think is an important issue, and I don't know how to deal with it, maybe my colleague does, is somebody builds a Class K house, they live in it for 3 years, and then they rent it out. And he's right. That is not the intention. This was an owner-builder thing from the get-go.
Sure.
On the county level and the state level. And I don't know what you can do about that, but I do think he's right to point it out.
Well, and I've seen it, that some folks go out there and build the Class K house, and then they flip them, sell them before and right now we're at a year. Our current one is you got to occupy for 1 year.
So going to 3 would be a step in the right direction,
Step
at
in the right
least,
direction, yes.
without totally taking away the property right to sell your own house.
Correct.
Yeah. Supervisor McCowan, do you have any comments just on this section? I see Anna Burkus has come into the room. I want to give you a chance to speak as well.
Well, maybe we should go ahead and conclude public comment, and then we
I
can
just
have our
wondered if you,
discussion.
okay, I can do that. Sure, Anna, and we did, all receive your email, thank you
Good
for it.
morning.
Yeah.
May I approach the council and give you a letter and some
You may
copies?
approach the clerk.
Okay, the clerk. Okay, on top, I have a letter that I presented to you as well as the appropriate code, copies of the various codes. Would you like a letter as well? Just to the clerk, all right.
Yeah, I think, is it the same letter that is in our
More or
packet?
less,
Yeah.
slightly edited, same letter. My name's Anna Birkosh. I'm with Village Ecosystems. I'm here to discuss Class K, specifically about wastewater, but I just wanted to comment about Class K in general first. I wanted to say that I appreciate Class K in Mendocino County because I believe we have a heritage of unique homes that are oftentimes not always, but oftentimes built above standards and of really high quality and beauty. And as a general building and engineering contractor, I believe that we can have Class K homes not only on large parcels, also on smaller parcels, as well as of larger square footage that are done well. And I do understand that it puts a little bit of an onus on the building department to do some extra checkups on those homes and such, but I believe it's worthwhile. And then on to wastewater. I believe our...
Anna, before you go on, because we've been discussing this before you got here, one of the issues with this new Class K ordinance will be, what does limited density mean? And because that, this is limited density owner builder. That issue, so what should be the minimum parcel size? And secondly, what should be the maximum square footage of a Class K home?
I don't know that I would put a maximum square footage on it. I think it just needs the appropriate oversight, and that the builder may have to pay so that the county doesn't have to foot the bill for that.
Okay.
And I guess the minimum density, I would say around an acre.
Okay.
I have heard 5 acres thrown around, and I don't think that's necessary. I just visited a home in Casper that's on less than that, and I thought it was an absolutely beautiful and well-built home.
Okay, just, you're
That's my opinion.
Well,
you're a subject matter
The
person?
purpose,
Go ahead.
the purpose isn't, can you build a beautiful home on that lot? Is that home then a threat to your neighbors when fire breaks out?
That's why I was saying there's an extra onus on planning and building to do maybe some additional inspections, and I do approve additional inspections and getting our planning and building staff up to a level where they're able to analyze that home and do that. And I don't have an issue of passing that cost on to the landowner if they want to build a home that's larger or on a smaller piece of property. What I'm trying to make the point of is to recognize that Mendocino County has a unique style of home building that actually can be a benefit to our community. As you've seen kind of there's been a few books written that have these pictures of these homes and feature them, and I don't think we should limit our ability to build these beautiful homes. I think we should just make sure we can appropriately regulate and manage them so that they're safe, especially with fire safety. That's obviously of utmost importance.
Okay, thank you. You can go on.
Thank you.
Sorry,
It's
I
okay.
just segued.
So
wanted to get
as
your
you guys
input.
know, I'm pretty passionate about wastewater treatment and alternative wastewater treatment systems for a variety of environmental issues, environmental solutions that I won't go into right now, but I'm happy to talk to you about later. But the purpose today of me coming was to let you know about what I have learned about our local and state policy so that you can make informed decisions about our options moving forward. And specifically, I'm interested in having composting toilets, alternative gray water systems, and other biological systems as options for wastewater treatment, both in addition to full septic systems as well as in replacement to part of the septic system or full septic systems. And when one is considering this, there's a lot of assumptions that one might make, such as if that home were ever to be sold, it's obvious that they would need to have the appropriate soil and a place designated for a full septic system in case they needed to expand and the next owner didn't want to have an alternative system.
If I may just bring up one issue that I saw, and it may have been in your letters or I read it somewhere else, about the gray water systems can include water from anywhere but the kitchen.
Gray water systems currently in the Gray Water Code in Chapter 16 can only include shower, bath,
Showers,
lavatory,
bath,
laundry. That Gray Water Code was written as a streamlined way for people to get gray water into their garden really quickly as a response to the emergency drought. It does not mean that you can't make an alternative system for gray water under a wastewater treatment policy, like an on-site wastewater treatment system that is an alternative to a septic system. Does that make sense? Okay, so we are allowed to develop those systems. And in addition to that, the state is working on a dark gray water system policy for the kitchen sink, so that will also be addressed at the state level. One of the other prominent issues is that the current gray water code requires that you have a valve that allows you to switch from the gray water system to a sewer or septic system. And that gray water is approximately about 50% of a household wastewater. So if one was going to have a composting toilet and a gray water system and then reduce their septic system by 50%, they could still follow the state law, have the valve to have it go to the septic system, but not use the septic system unless there was an emergency or they were doing a load of bleach or some reason. Not that you want to put bleach in your septic, but people do it all the time. And I just wanted to specifically show you some of the policies that allow this. One of the policies, or one of the reports, is from the Regional Water Board, and it's the final substitute environmental document on the on-site wastewater treatment system policy. And so I give you this table, which just acknowledges that Mendocino County allows composting toilets as legal. Also from that report, we have this table, which allows under Tier 2 a variety of wastewater treatment systems, including composting toilets, plant-based systems, and some other alternatives that Mendocino County may consider. And also, I have the California Plumbing Code that has a section that says, let's see if I should have highlighted it. It basically gives an alternative to quote-unquote water closets, which I take to read as toilets. And you can read that paragraph also on the, it's this paper, it's right in here. There's a sentence in there. I meant to highlight it ahead of time. The other thing I wanted to discuss was in our land use development policy, we used to have a section on composting toilets called Rural Alternative Toilets. It's on this page. And it allowed for the use of composting toilets, pit privies, et cetera, in addition to illegal composting, in addition to a legal septic system on 10 acres or more. And that's been removed. And at the last stakeholders meeting, several of us questioned why it had been removed. We actually noticed it about a year ago at one of the stakeholder meetings. And basically, we're informed by environmental health that it doesn't mean that Mendocino County citizens can't still have ancillary toilets, composting toilets, et cetera. It just means that they're not going to regulate them at environmental health and that they still, at this point in time, need a full septic system or sewage treatment system.
Okay, and we do have a notation this morning from Dave that he spoke with Charles Reed at Regional Water Quality, and Mr. Reed's position was that outhouses are not allowed under the new state regs. He has referred the question to Sacramento to see if we can get a special allowance for larger rural sites.
Yes, and he says that they're not specifically prohibited in that letter, I believe, but rather that they're just not allowed under the on-site wastewater treatment system policy. So someone who really wanted a pit privy could go through a state-level process to get a legal pit privy at this time, but does somebody want to do that? So I think that that's why Charles Reed is following through with that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, yeah.
Well, the way I interpreted that was pit privies were prohibited, but composting toilets were not. And then you're saying our section in Mendocino County that allowed, or that set criteria for composting toilets was removed, which was not the same as prohibiting the use of composting toilets.
Yes, I interpret it very similarly to you. We are allowed to create policy for composting toilets in Mendocino County at this time. We are not allowed to create policy and allow for pit privies. But that doesn't mean that pit privies are specifically prohibited at a state level. It just means that an additional process would have to happen, and it might not succeed.
Well, and do you think that process would start at the local level and we would send something up for approval, like including it in the LAMP?
I would say another discussion with Charles Reed would be in order to request guidance on that. If he's going to the state level to ask, I would follow up on that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we do currently allow composting toilets in Mendocino County.
That is
However,
what I
we
was
require
explicitly told
a septic system.
by Marlena at Environmental Health, and I had misinterpreted that in the
Yeah.
past. When
Well, then-
that policy was removed from our guidance, our land use development guidance, I had assumed it meant it wasn't allowed, and she clarified that that's not the case. It just means it's not regulated.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just going to emphasize that point because it seems odd that we would remove the regulation but still allow them. So presumably, because that regulation, I think, set a 10-acre minimum and a setback from a property line. So now it's just case by case if someone comes in, or?
It's not, she said they don't even review them. I think that some of the reason it might have been reviewed or removed is it wasn't written too well for example, it included pit privies.
Oh, okay.
And so the language wasn't very good, and so maybe the simple thing was to remove it first. I don't know.
Right. So, Mr. Chair, maybe we could ask staff to further review that issue and make specific
Yeah.
recommendations as to exactly where they think we currently stand with that issue.
If I could say one more thing, just that I was noted that environmental health is down to staff members. And I think that when I come to them, their specific issue about dealing with this is they have no time because they're short-staffed. And I think with a lot of the cannabis stuff going through right now in the ADA compliance, they're going to have a really hard time addressing this. And I also, David Jensen also said that they came in under budget regularly because they're understaffed. And they can't fill those positions. So I would like to request that either consider hiring somebody to do that work or working with an independent contractor to do that work so that it actually gets done. Because I have been working with environmental health and going to stakeholder meetings for 3 years throughout this LAMP process. And I don't believe they actually have the time to address it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a
Okay.
concern of mine.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your
Thanks,
time.
Ann. So when does this LAMP process begin? Is this a couple of months down the road for us? Trey, can you comment on that?
I'm Trey Strickland, Environmental Health. I'm not positive. I think the water board is still reviewing our LAMP. And then after that, we will be bringing it to the board.
Okay.
Um,
And it will include many of these issues that were just raised by the speaker regarding
I
gray
believe,
water and different kinds of toilets and so on.
yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, okay.
But the LAMP does need to be approved by the water board.
Okay.
There's going to be certain issues that we are not going to have
Leeway.
the leeway,
Yeah,
the flexibility to make a different determination.
okay,
But if we don't put something in there, it can't be approved, and
right.
so
But
currently our LAMP that we submitted to them does not include specific allowance for composting toilets, or it does?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it did not.
does not. And is that something we can address when it comes before the board?
Well, we've sent them our draft for
Yeah.
their approval. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then they'll send back, they'll either say you need to make these revisions, or they'll say good to go.
Yeah, and we're working closely with Charles Reed and
Okay.
Regional Water Board staff.
Okay, but I think what we're hearing from this committee and very possibly from the whole board is that we would like these considerations about gray water systems and composting toilets and even pit privies on large rural properties to be considered. So if they're not even under consideration, then it seems like that's a problem that we should address at some point.
Yeah, I'll take these issues back to Marlena and Dave Jensen,
Okay,
and they're much more familiar with the LAMP and the LAMP process.
okay,
And they'll be able to make a determination what we can include in the LAMP and what we can't include in the LAMP.
okay. Thanks, Trey. John?
And I would say this is related to, but in a way separate from the Class K discussion that we're having.
Yeah.
But, maybe we could get an informational presentation on these issues, just so we're clear where we stand on them.
Well, it sounds like EH will be bringing the LAMP to the board.
Well, once they hear
Yes.
from the State Water Board.
Once you've heard
but
from the water board.
If we want to influence what's actually in the LAMP, sooner would probably be better than later, I would think.
Do you concur with that, Trey?
Yeah, and I'll pass that on to Dave
Because
Jensen.
it seems
He'll know
like we
that-
may need an agenda item prior to the LAMP coming back to the board, and I see Ann Mulgard from HHSA is nodding her head. Did you want to make a comment, Ann?
No, just that we can bring it back. Sure, we can bring it back again before. Yeah,
Ann Mulgard?
no problem. Ann Mulgard, Health and
HHSA.
Human Services. So that would be fine. We can give you something in writing pretty quickly, and then we can also schedule it to give you a brief presentation. Would you like it to this or to the full board? Y'all can decide.
What do you think, John?
Well, I would say, given the timing, perhaps to the full board, since we've already submitted the draft LAMP to the State Water Board. 'Cause
But it does
I-
seem like we need a brief agenda item. if
To
it's
make
gonna-
sure that we've
to make-
crosswalked all of these
yeah,
issues.
Yeah,
Excellent.
And that would allow the board to give direction if they choose, because,
yeah.
and I think and perhaps we are not entirely clear what is allowed, and
Yeah.
certainly I think in this area, I think we, and I would expect the full board would be in favor of being as permissive as we can be and still be protecting public health and the environment.
Right.
And frankly, the concern is the state might be overly restrictive here.
So it sounds like we might kind of have three categories when we come back. What was originally requested, what else you'd like to add, and what are those questionable items you'd like to add but we don't think we'll get through, but we can strategize together about how we might advocate for them.
Right.
Okay.
But I think at a minimum, we want to make sure we're asking for everything the state would currently allow.
Exactly. Okay. As permissive as the law, current law, our
So I think you've
interpretation of the
captured
current
it.
law. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ann. Okay, so is there anyone else here who would like to speak to the Class K consideration? Michael?
My name is Michael Schaefer. I live in Comtree. I want to speak because I live in an area that Class K is a very useful form of permitting process. As indicated, many of the letters that you received, the cost of a regular permit can be very high, and especially on some of these water requirements can be very high. I first built both my parts of my house were built under regular classifications. I'm not a Class K person, but my first house I was allowed to build an owner-built composting toilet. And I had a gray water system that I installed, but at the time that the final sign-off was done, they made me seal off all the parts that would go into the garden. So I was left with having that gray water tank just drain into, into the ground. I mean, I had to dig a trench, but it wasn't a full septic system. 10 years later, in the 90s, when I added onto the house and I went to a septic system, the cost of the septic system was more than the cost of my initial 1,000 square foot house. They're both around $40,000. And so I think when you look at some of these things, and we want to have affordable housing in rural areas, that the decisions you make will have great impact on that. And what will happen probably is that the stricter you are, the more illegal housing will continue to be built. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments this time? Michael, do you have any?
I don't. I think I have some clear direction now where I'm going to go.
Okay, no, I'm not sure you have clear direction on two essential things. So what is limited density going to mean? Is it going to mean 5 acres, 2 acres, 1 acre? And also the limitation on square footage, whereas my colleague seems to be more around the 1,500, 2,000. I'm more around the 2,500 to 3,000.
And when I write the draft up, I'll have all of those numbers in it. And
Well,
and
let's see if we can.
Go ahead, Supervisor.
Come to some consensus here. And to me, so there's several things in play here with Class K. One, and you would know more about this than I believe initially it was a method of, it was a path towards legalization for structures that had been built without any permits.
Well, I think that was clean slate.
Oh, okay. And then
Right,
Class
and
K
Class
evolved
K
out of
kind of
that?
evolved out of
Evolved.
clean slate.
Okay.
Clean slate was prospective. Excuse me, clean slate was retrospective. It was more like an amnesty program. Like, let's, it sort of reminds me of marijuana in some ways. Let's figure out a way that we can get more people inside the tent. Whereas Class K, which was kind of a statewide phenomenon, was we've got all these back to the lander, owner builder types. They want to use alternative materials. They want to build limited density. They want, let's figure out a way to allow them to do it. And it became a state, became Title 25
Okay.
in state law.
But also, some of the things that went along with that, I think, and when you say limited density, I believe part of the intent there was, yes, we're allowing people to use this Class K system to construct a dwelling. We're relaxing standards, we're allowing alternatives, but the limited density was, I believe, in part to limit the public safety impact of what happens when something goes wrong, because you didn't have a dwelling that was sprinklered.
Yeah.
So if you're on a 40-acre parcel, it's less impact than if you're on a 1-acre parcel. And then I think another part of the original intent may have been to allow someone to cost effectively build a dwelling and owner occupied. I think that was part of it. We wanted to give an owner a more cost-effective way to construct a dwelling.
That seems a fair statement there. That's the way I read it.
And so those are kind of some of the things I focus on when I say, 2,000 square feet, 1 acre. The 1 acre is clearly intended to limit, or the 5 acre rather, is clearly intended to limit the impact, because we have a lot of neighborhoods east of Highway 1 where there's smaller lots and substandard road systems, confusing road systems, and if you got a fire started and a lot of overgrown underbrush, and we can say it's the coast, it burns really well under a lot of conditions. Even in February, we've had fires get out of control. So, I think that's an argument in favor of sticking with a larger parcel size, but maybe a compromise there. Yeah, we had a lot of emails come in. None of those people who sent the emails showed up. And it's easy to generate people hitting a button and sending an email when they've heard one side of the story in a rather alarmist way without all the background. And I think that's partly what we saw here. But I would suggest we have the 5 acre minimum and we allow that to go down to 1 acre with sprinklers.
Well, that's a good alternative.
Because the the fire-safe siding, that's great. But the real threat isn't the fire coming into the house, it's the fire getting out of the house and going to the neighbors. And the sprinklers is the only thing that's going to stop that.
Oh, correct. I'll give you an example. I did a science project with my son when he was in high school. We built 3 structures. They weren't big structures, but one was a non-rated structure, one was a 1-hour rated structure, and the other one was non-rated with the sprinkler system in it. And the one with the sprinkler system went out like that. The non-rated one burnt up like that, and the 1 hour sat there and made it for the whole hour before the flames came out of the structure. So we did a test scenario on it, and that's what the sprinklers do work.
And so I think the 5 acres is consistent with the limited density, which I think was based on intent of not create undue risk for the neighborhood. And as to the square footage, if a big part of this was to allow people to build a cost-effective structure, I still think 2,000 square feet is a pretty good-sized home. But again, maybe a compromise there is it's 2,000 square feet or 2,500, and there's no upper limit, but beyond 2,500, you're sprinklered.
Just, yeah, I appreciate your comments. I just think most people who are building Class K are not wanting to do sprinkler systems.
Exactly.
I think they would be going, they'd be going UBC probably.
Yeah, regular permit.
If they want a sprinkler, I guess.
Well, stop right
Yeah,
there,
go ahead.
please, because that illustrates the problem. People are going Class K so they can skirt around
so
the
they
safety
cannot do
requirement
sprinkler.
that is
Right.
otherwise required.
Right.
That's the attraction of
Right. Class
K for someone building a mansion.
Right. Now, I do think that, if we went to 1 acre, say in 2,500, which is kind of where I am, we are making some significant improvements. The main improvement we're making, which I don't get any pushback on, or just positive feedback, is the 3 inspections. That's a big improvement right there.
That's huge.
To just the demand that we're going to look inside the walls before you close up those walls, and we're going to have a foundation, we're going to have the 3 inspections. The other thing is that if you include things like, like the siding and the roofing and the venting, you've also made a substantial improvement in what people are doing right now.
Correct.
So I think what we've got, I totally understand what Supervisor McCowan is saying. I really do. And I think in a, I think that the problems out there in securing housing in rural parts of our county are severe enough that I don't want to make it any more difficult. Now, I'm also very happy to, let the full board, have a couple alternatives and let the full board take a crack at it. We are a very, very rural county, and I'm just hearing a lot of people from the coast who feel like these 1 acre parcels should be adaptable for Class K. And I guess I'm not ready to let go of that possibility. Lee, do you want to weigh in on this? What are you hearing from contractors?
Well,
You want to stand? Would you come up? I'm not totally convinced that I'm right about this.
no, well, but
I'm
you're
real-
expressing what's out there,
I'm
Dan.
really not.
I
I think what you're saying, Supervisor McCowan, makes a lot of sense. I know the depth of the housing crisis on the coast. We don't even have enough housing. We hear that we can't even hire teachers because they can't find a place to live.
No.
We can't hire social service workers,
You look through the other standards though, Dan, and you sign like Butte, 1,250 square feet, maximum size before. And again, it ties back to what John is saying, that when the densities start growing, your exposure goes up. There's no two ways about it. And if you don't take that into account, you're going to create, again, a design for disaster in this thing. But to your point, I had contractors that called me and said, hey, I built a 1,500 or 2,000, 2,700 square foot. As you saw just recently, we had almost a 4,000 square foot house coming into the permitting process for Class K.
We had a 6,000.
Well, that was the next one, and it's 6,000 square foot. So these, and she made a very good point. There's some beautiful homes, especially on the coast, that are built under K, and they're not deficient except in the fire safe standards.
So you're saying they're not necessarily using Class K to build this innovation thing. They could still build the same house, but what it doesn't have is the sprinklers.
Well, sprinklers, some of them don't even want the hardened walls and the rest of the stuff. The way we're set up right now, we can build with redwood siding. Not that it's legal, but we can do it the way K is presently constituted.
Right.
And he's got to pretty much at his final inspection say it's okay.
Do either you or Mr. Lockett, like what happened in Lake County, how much of that, I mean, I don't know that anything could have stopped those fires once they got going, but is there any applicability of what happened there to here?
No, there's definitely applicability there. There's good cases over there, and I've been over there and seen some of the stuff with fire safe standard on it. Probably the single biggest problem right now is a lot of the stuff that was built in Lake County, now that Lake County has going back through the process, is not being allowed back in the same spot because it doesn't meet the standards. And one of the biggest standards is access. Some of the driveways, especially around the Cobb area, and I think Michael can talk to it, Cobb area, your initial driveway off the thing is more than 15%. The county is saying no, because we can't get our fire trucks in. We can't get access to those. Again, this is where you come back. You can have all this alternative codes you want, but if you don't have the ingredients to protect everybody, we're making a big mistake. But Dan, to your question, yes, I have the gamut in the contractors saying, I built a 600 foot, I built 4,000 square foot, all under Class K. It's certainly nice because I don't have to meet Mr. Lockett until I'm done.
Yeah, but under what we're talking about, you have to meet Mr. Lockett 3 times instead of 1
3
time.
times.
And
But also, if we go below the 5 acres, I mean, you made the point, the greater the density, the greater the risk to your neighbors.
To your
Like
neighbors.
if it's only what you're doing to yourself, well, we still have the issue after 3 years. Right now, after 1 year, you sell it and you're out of there. But
Well, or you turn it to a rental house. You turn it to a vacation rental unit. I've had many of those people, especially on the coast, come and say, that is my rental unit. I make enough income off of that.
But again, isn't that something we're not regulating now?
I'm not going to go there, Dan. I mean, it's a tool that the property owner has to make money. I don't think it meets your intent 30 years ago, but that wasn't even in the discussion. Anything else?
Okay, well, I do want to wrap this up, and I don't think the committee is going to agree, but I'm wondering if we can if we can put an ordinance together and let the full board make the final decision on what whether it's going to be 1 acre or 5 acres, and whether it's going to be, can you agree on 2,500?
if we have agreement, I'll go with 2,500. And then also, I think we're in agreement on the 3-year deed restriction, and yes, that's not a perfect answer, but the
Yeah,
deed,
we're
the
definitely
deed,
in agreement on
the
that.
deed restriction does provide some teeth in that at least any future owner will know up front. Now, a renter may not know, but any owner would know up front they're purchasing a Class K home.
Yeah.
And then I guess as to the acreage minimum, for the reason stated, I'm not willing to go below 5 acres, but I would create an exception. If they're sprinklered, they can go down to an acre. But otherwise,
Yeah.
I just feel it's too big a risk to the neighborhood.
So can we let the full board make that decision?
And I think we're otherwise in agreement.
I'd be comfortable with letting the full board decide. I got a feeling that Supervisor Dirty's gonna, he's hearing from the same people I'm hearing from.
So,
But
let
I
me
think
be
that's
clear
the
here.
only, I think that may be the only thing. I do want to see these fire-safe measures that you mentioned put in there regarding the firewalls and the
Correct.
venting and the class
They will be in there.
and the roofing.
And in the current code, there is some standards that are written
Yeah.
into our current
Yeah.
code.
Now-
which will be referenced.
Now, you know, the thing that John mentioned about the, you know, I think along with that option of going to 1 acre, there should be what he mentioned, which is that, okay, if you go to sprinkler, I sort of think sprinkler systems don't really even belong in a Class K ordinance, because nobody who's going to build Class K is going to want to, you know, that's one of the reasons they don't want to do it.
Correct.
I mean, I agree with you.
But that highlights the reason.
Well, I agree it
They're
does.
trying to avoid a proven safety
Right.
method that would protect
Yeah.
their neighbors.
Yeah,
And them.
but I wonder, like, look at Mendocino County. How many houses in Mendocino County have sprinkler systems? 5%?
Probably.
I'd be surprised if it's much more than that.
Yeah.
I know I don't have one.
You have a lot of structures that are being permitted under the Class K with those.
But didn't you say that of all the building permits for housing, that under 20% are Class K?
Yeah, the total building permits, so that would include a whole array of building permits, but yeah, 20%. I think that's what we said the last time.
Uh-huh.
And, Mr. Chair, just briefly, could
Yeah.
Mr. Lockett review what we're proposing to exempt Class K from? It would be the sprinklers, it would be the tempered glass. Were there other key items on your list?
Those were the two big ones there.
Okay, thank you.
And so then, when I write this, we're gonna put 1 to 5 acres and let the full board decide.
Yeah.
Let the board decide which way to go on that.
Okay,
And maybe include, another option would be to allow 1 acre but with sprinklers.
very good.
And otherwise, I think it's a unified.
Good.
And then that will come back in June, though, for one more final look before
Right.
it goes on to the board.
So at our June standing committee meeting.
Very good, we'll have it in front of you.
Okay, thank
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Lee, for bringing this issue to us. Thank you, Anna, for your input, Michael. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to our next item. If I knew what that was. Okay, the next item is report and update regarding EMS, related referrals to the committee, including boundary discrepancies, Mendocino County's EMS ordinance, elimination of fire as a designated recipient of fees, impact of policies and procedures on first responder agencies. This was the, what I see here on our agenda is the complete referral that was made to this committee. I'm not sure we're getting into all those issues, because I actually thought that the boundary discrepancy issue was a LAFCO matter. So I'll turn it over to Tammy Moss Chandler, our HHSA director, and you can kind of feel your way through this agenda item.
Good morning, Supervisor Hamburg, Supervisor
Good morning.
McCowan, CEO Angelo, County Council Elliott, Tammy Moss Chandler. I'm your HHSA Director for Health and Human Services. And as such, I've been directly overseeing the contract with Coastal Valleys EMS in the absence of a public health director within the agency. So typically I would have Coastal Valleys EMS with me today, but it is actually the annual statewide association conference right now, and Brian Cleaver, who's the manager of Coastal Valleys EMS, is the statewide association president. So he and most of his team are at that statewide conference today. But I'm happy, as Supervisor Hamburg said, several of these items have actually been addressed in many ways over the last few months. So I just wanted to give you an update, since these continued to come up as a referral item to this committee, of where we're at with each of those specific topics, and address any additional questions or concerns today, so we can move forward. So these are actually the three items, just slightly reworded, that I wanted to address today in the order of really that where we brought them to you over the last few months to the full Board of Supervisors. So as you know, you adopted a new EMS ordinance in February. It was actually brought to your board in its form for its first reading in December, and was finalized and adopted by your board on February 14th. Of 2017. And one of the items that's listed in the referral items is the fact that fire was actually called out in the former ordinance in a particular section of the ordinance that talks about per call fees for ambulance-based providers. And you may remember this discussion because we talked about it actually with the full board both in December of 2016 when we gave you an EMS update, and then in further detail when you adopted the EMS ordinance in February. And we talked about the fact that this actually changed statewide through the transition of Medicare rules around antitrust issues, and it's part of the modernization that happened of bringing the EMS ordinance up to the current requirements of EMS in California. So there's no longer per call fees that are allowed for ambulance operators, so that whole section was removed, and there was a bullet that spoke specifically about those fees being used by volunteer fire agencies for equipment and supplies. So we had the opportunity actually to meet with the Mendocino County Association of Fire Districts the day after that ordinance was adopted, and talk a little bit more about why that section was removed from the ordinance, but that there are other ways in practice that volunteer fire agencies have been getting their equipment and supplies. In large part, when there's actually on scene and an ambulance comes and picks up a patient, there's actually an exchange of any supplies used at that time. And we also, I actually offered at that meeting to continue to work with the fire districts on grant opportunities to really look at our equipment needs across the whole system when it comes to EMS equipment and supplies that are used by volunteer fire agencies. So the second item that Supervisor Hamburg actually mentioned is around the service areas, and it was actually at that meeting we spent the bulk of the time talking about fire district boundaries and LAFCO and the different roles of fire districts and LAFCO. And there were actually at least one or two other follow-up meetings specifically with CVMS, with Coastal Valleys and LAFCO, and trying to help our partners better understand ambulance service zones and how those are different than LAFCO zones and fire district boundaries, how they get developed. So I'm happy to talk more about that if there are other questions still, but I think we've attempted to address those questions in the community about those various roles, and the fact that ambulance zones are not approved by LAFCO in any way because they're really based on the need to transport clients and to dispatch ambulances in real time and make sure that there's patient care. And then finally, I know there was this general item about how EMS policy and procedures developed, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. But really, we're trying to get more information out about our local emergency medical care committee or commission. Every county jurisdiction in EMS has an EMCC, and that's actually where through that forum locally, which is a formal commission, and through CVMS's very broad public process is how policies and procedures are adopted that are primarily related to medical care. And Dr. Mark Lowato, as our medical director, is very involved in those processes as they move forward. So this is a slide that I know is familiar to you because it's been part of our presentations to your board over this last year. Just giving the update as we came to you in late 2016 to talk about the revised ordinance that again you adopted in February, and then our timeline of how that relates to the timing that we needed that EMS ordinance in place in order to move forward with the exclusive operating area RFP. And actually back in December is when I first talked to your board about, I know a question that's come up recently about the exclusive operating area RFP and the dispatch service RFP. And I actually mentioned it publicly then in December that that we were looking at the possibility of a single RFP with two distinct components for the exclusive operating area and for dispatch. I know you've each been involved in RFP processes where you have multiple components and bidders can respond to one or all of these. Is actually what our kind of best practice advice for something like this is, so that we continue to stay on a parallel track that's closely linked around how formation of an exclusive operating area in Mendocino County is intimately related to how dispatch for ambulance services will happen county-wide as well as within the exclusive operating area. And the fact that there's been these fits and starts over the last 3 years around both the exclusive operating area and the dispatch contract that we currently hire with CAL FIRE, and going out to bid on both of these, and that they're so intimately related that we want to make sure the communication about them, whether it's a single RFP or two RFPs, are done in tandem so that the bidders can really bid and respond to how they relate to each other in terms of services and dispatch of ambulance services in the county. So again, the EMS ordinance that you adopted in February really was this modernized update to address all the aspects of pre-hospital medical care that we know today versus when that ordinance was first adopted a couple of decades ago. And that again, that third bullet is around what I already mentioned, that it now allows language for there to be an exclusive operating area within Mendocino County. And it really gave important updates in what EMS is charged to do today in California counties, and really focused on this delivery of high quality care across the system. And so just as a reminder again, that really our primary issue within EMS dispatching is this primary principle of getting the closest resource to the scene. And this is just a summary of how we deal with ambulance zones from setup, and when there are issues around ambulance zoning and how ambulances are being stationed in a county, it first goes to your local EMS authority, which is Coastal Valleys, and then if there's any disagreements beyond that, it goes to the state EMS authority. So I know you've seen this slide before, just a reminder for anybody who's new in the audience about this history and really the rapid changing movement of EMS authority in the last 2 decades, really 3 decades in California, but the last 2 decades here in Mendocino County, since Coastal Valleys EMS became our local EMS authority under this 1980 EMS Act.
I actually had one question on the previous slide, if we could go back for a second. So the third point, zones are created by determining the midpoint between station locations. That midpoint may not determine the quickest route based on what kind of roads you're traveling over. Is that factored in or not? So it should be time of response rather than miles, perhaps.
That's right, yes. So really, both of those things are taken into account when you're looking at the EMS system. Is really is, like you said, about time of response, and this kind of really dynamic process of positioning ambulances and why ambulance move.
But Coastal Valleys determines
Coastal Valleys
what the
determines
zones
this. That's right.
Okay, thank you.
With all of that information in mind. Okay.
And I assume they receive extensive input from the ambulance companies?
Yes, I am sorry I don't know all the input processes for that, but there is definitely a dynamic input process, especially right now in the fact that we can have any ambulance company come into Mendocino County right now. We don't have an exclusive operating area. So that's an ongoing dialogue, but I know that there are processes anytime this changes that go to the EMCC, and the ambulance companies are included in that organization as well.
And I guess, and this is kind of jumping ahead to discussion, but I guess part of the problematic issue for a fire district that operates an ambulance, and the ambulance zone extends beyond the fire district boundaries, and they're dispatched, well, they're going to go, but now they're responding outside their district, and that raises a host of issues we're all familiar with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And the reality is, out of our 22 fire districts, it's only a small number of those that actually operate an ambulance. But it is true. Those that do operate an ambulance and choose to operate an ambulance have to be in this more dynamic process of ambulance zones beyond their fire district boundaries.
Thank you.
So, Tammy, how many of our 22 fire districts and companies operate an ambulance?
I should know that number off the top of my head, but I have the cheat sheet in my folder right back there, so I can get that.
How many?
Three.
Uh-huh.
So
that's-
McMillan said 3, so the 3 would be Elk,
that's
operates a
Anderson
basic
Valley
life
and
support
Elk.
transport. Laytonville and Covelo both have advanced life support ambulance transports.
So that's 4.
And actually, Anderson Valley now, in the future.
Well,
will have that.
they're moving towards,
Well, Anderson Valley will be.
Ukiah still has a transport ambulance.
And Ukiah still has the capability to do that through their transport.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And so those, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, but I did want to mention that really in this process of looking at what we do next with the RFP and the stakeholders who are involved in that definitely the city not only has a transport ambulance, but also has what are known as 201 rights. I know you've heard about that at the full board before, and CEO Angelo and I are having another dialogue with the city specific to the 201 rights in later this month, as well as the fact that we both have dispatch agreements for both EMS and fire with CAL FIRE right now. So after the state authority, which again, a lot of the rules and regulations we're trying to apply at the local level are coming from the state. So we know there's always the dynamic for Mendocino County that we have to really think about the rural nature of our work, a less populated area, when there's statewide coordination and expectations. And that's, for me, this is really important discussion locally around our local EMS agency and the work that Coastal Valleys does in partnership with Sonoma County. So, I wanted to just remind you of this kind of local authority because sometimes I'm finding in some of my conversations locally that it is this aspect of what is EMS, what's an EMS's authority and what's not in terms of a lot of different work. So certainly the policy and procedure work that we do and the dispatch and coordination of ambulance services is what we're required to do. Here in Mendocino County, we historically went into partnership to have a shared dispatch and coordination of services with fire districts a couple of decades ago, around the same time this work was happening, and it makes so much sense because of the symbiotic kind of relationship. But then to realize out of all those fire districts that only a handful of them are actually operating ambulances, which is really your EMS authority and requirement. Here, and that really the EMS authority that we have is around medical control and identifying hospitals and where we have hospitals that provide just basic life support, and then where we go for specialty care. So I think this is a strength for Mendocino County in terms of both having Dr. Lovato as our medical director for the whole system through Sonoma County, as a local emergency department doctor who really knows Mendocino County well, but also knows that we can't provide all of the needs we have for our patients when there's an emergency on scene that requires trauma level care, STEMI level care, cardiac arrest, stroke. People have to go to Sonoma County and then from there further down the bay. So the strength of having an emergency room doctor helping with our policies and procedures that really make those connections from a rural hospital area all the way through to our critical need and our regional trauma response. So again, I just wanted to go back to this slide to see, if there were any other questions about the dispatch processes that we're working on right now involving our stakeholders. So we went back after our December update to you and your February 14th adoption of the new ordinance and reconvened the stakeholders across the two requests for proposal groups that have been working a long time with changes in your county staff, including me and County Counsel Elliott, who kind of are stepping in after those stakeholder groups were first formed a couple of years ago, and bringing people up to where we are now that the ordinance is adopted and we actually really have a process to move this forward. So those groups have met, and I think there's been some great feedback that we really are incorporating into those RFPs, and we're very hopeful that we're on time to release both RFPs. Again, either in tandem together as one RFP with two distinct components this summer, as early as possible, because this is such a dramatic change with the EOA for Mendocino County that we really want to be able to spend all of the fall really talking about how we would transition to an EOA under a new contracted provider, that we could make that selection before the new year of 2018 and have a contract in place so there could be a good transition plan in those first 6 months of 2018 with the goal of having actually a exclusive operating area agreement and a dispatch contract that actually recognizes that EOA and works with that in tandem by a year from now. So one thing I just wanted to let the standing committee know about today is that you have these 3 agreements for advanced life support enhancement projects that your board first initiated a few years ago. It was talked about in fiscal year 14-15, and then funding began for Laytonville, Covelo, and Anderson Valley in these 3 special enhancement projects trying to get ready for the exclusive operating area and build capacity in some of the areas that would connect up near where the exclusive operating area would be. Right now, those contracts were funded first last fiscal year 15-16. They're funded right now through June of this year. So during your budget hearings, it'll be a discussion around continuation of funding at some level. And then CEO Angelo actually brought up in one of your recent discussions at the board level the idea of bringing in some additional consulting services for billing and claiming, especially for those districts that are doing transport on a minimum level right now. I think one thing that's hard sometimes to accept in the healthcare financing reality is that health insurance only pays for transportation, not for response. So nowhere in the EMS system in California is there a billable service for a response to a scene when there's a 911 call. What's paid for through health insurance, which is how ambulance services are funded. They're not funded through the county, right? They're funded through a private or public health insurance provider. And we get some ability to influence that by setting local rates or approving local rates for those ambulance transports. But that's actually the one billable service is the transport itself. So, so this idea of bringing in some expertise to just see is there anything more we could do, much like Bodega Bay did. They expanded their transport within their prior district to have more opportunities to bill for transportation. Is there some opportunity like that for some of our partners? And then I'm open to hearing other ideas today that we might bring back to you during your budget discussions over the next two months or 6 weeks as well. So with that, I just want to say it's been a pleasure actually for me to get to meet many of the local constituents working on this effort who've been working a lot longer than me to really try to align what's happening across fire and EMS and our simpatico relationship of trying to provide quality service out in the community. So, so looking forward to any additional questions or suggestions you have.
John, do you have any questions for Tammy?
No.
Tammy, before you leave the podium, the ALS contracts with Anderson Valley, Covelo, and Laytonville, those are now in their second year?
Yes, that's correct.
And,
This-
and are those the, I seem to remember the figure $60,000 per, is that correct?
Yes, just over 60,000 this year per contract.
Okay, and for, I see Chief Avila's here and also the director of the ambulance, but I'll let you speak to this, but does the BLS still meet the ALS at the top of the Boonville grade? The 253 grade? Or is ALS being delivered directly to the valley? And you can speak to that when I'll give you a chance.
The answer is yes.
Yes, okay. And then the other question I had is if we go to a unified RFP on the EOA and the dispatch, that seems a little incongruent to me just because the EOA is inland only and the dispatch is countywide. And so how does that create any problems or?
No, I think that's actually where the scopes of work for both are going to be distinct, but I think that may be ultimately to help with that communication, we may do both. But we want to make sure that they're linked so that one of them doesn't start to go astray on a different timeline. And then the reality is for dispatch for ambulance, countywide, the dispatch contracts will have to recognize the EOA in the unique way that ambulances will be posted within the EOA, and then the rest of the county. So, so it is countywide, but they aren't mutually exclusive. They're intimately intertwined, if you will.
And will I guess we anticipate more than one bidder for both of these? Because I always hear CAL FIRE spoken of in terms of dispatch, but I don't know who would be the competitive bidder for that contract.
Well, I don't know who the competitive bidder is, but I would say that we do anticipate more than one.
You do anticipate more than one.
Vendor for both the EOA and the dispatch.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tammy. And I know we have people here who want to address this. Ben, are you here to speak to us this morning?
Sure.
From Elk? And Ben, if you would just give your name for the record.
My name is Ben McMillan, and I'm from Elk, the services district there, as well as with the Association of Fire Districts. I would like to build on what Tammy Moss, good morning, gentlemen, ladies.
Good morning, Ben.
I would like to build on what Tammy Moss Chandler mentioned a minute ago, and Mr. McCowan also queried about, and that was the notion of EMS responses outside of designated district boundaries. We had a meeting with LAFCO and Coastal Valleys EMS to discuss precisely this issue. And I became aware of something that I hadn't been aware of before, and that is that, at least according to Brian Cleaver from Coastal Valleys, the EMS law in the state of California requires one or an agency that participates in EMS functions to respond wherever they're needed. And so as a consequence, by participation in that process as providing an ambulance, for example, as Elk does, then we are now required as a participant in that system to respond wherever we're needed. So that transcends the district boundaries.
And presumably it would also relieve you of liability, but wouldn't address other operational issues.
Well, I don't know about the liability aspect, but...
Well, if you're required by law to respond, that's a pretty good defense.
Right, exactly. In terms of whether we're providing services, at taxpayer expense, but outside of the district. So that seems, that was a satisfactory explanation to me. Mm-hmm. That also seems to apply to first responders who are also, called to respond outside of their district areas. If an agency is providing these first responder EMS services, they fall under that same category. So if an agency is not providing EMS services, if they were to respond outside of their area, they could then have the problem with that providing services outside of their taxation area. But by providing those services, and they're called out for beyond that for that reason, I found that to be a very meaningful definition. Mm-hmm. The second thing that I wanted to comment about, it relates to the RFP, and I'm sure there will be others in the room who will want to talk about this process also. Speaking personally, I have a serious problem with the separation, the combination into a single RFP process that would enable a single provider to deal with the whole county because of that would, in essence, to me, preclude the opportunity for CAL FIRE to even to bid on the process because they are not an ambulance provider. So I'm not sure, and perhaps I don't understand all of the mechanisms that would make this work, but in my simplistic interpretation, I have a serious problem with that. Fire, going back to the meeting that I mentioned that was a combination of LAFCO and Coastal Valleys, it actually involved Anderson Valley and Elk, the other participants in the meeting. The meeting was called because of a jurisdictional boundary issue. And it got into a number of other arenas, but the whole issue of response and the importance of that was critical. One of the things that came up was the notion of Coastal Valley's responsibility in terms of providing medical and EMS support in the county. They said quite clearly that their function was to provide or to ensure that a paramedic ambulance, in other words, an ALS ambulance, would respond to any medical incident in the county as needed. That's a really nice function. That's an essential function. That could even be an air ambulance. Another aspect that they mentioned was that they also provide, as the slides document, they provide certification for EMTs and local EMS personnel. But Coastal Valleys does not regulate the responses of these local EMS functions, first responder EMT functions. They only regulate the ambulance function. Well, if you look at the responses and I think you've both been copied on the 2016 CAL FIRE call history. In that call history, you'll see that the preponderance of all the calls in the county are medical. Yet Coastal Valleys only is responsible for the ambulance portion of that. Fire is the responder in virtually every instance, except for the ones that are no fire response, that are inter-facility transfers, things of that sort. But in a general statement, fire is the primary responder and really needs to be the first responder because many decisions are made in that process that an ambulance doesn't make. There are functions that fire does. Fire carries tools with it for extrication. Fire makes decisions in terms of does a helicopter need to be canceled en route. I listened to probably about 4 hours worth of calls on scanner on my cell phone the other day, and I was listening to calls where, for example, Potter Valley responded to a call, and an air ambulance had already been dispatched to the scene based upon the nature of the caller. Well, Potter Valley arrived and canceled that air ambulance en route, and the reason was because of the technical expertise of fire on scene first. And that's a really critical aspect that if I'm concerned that if the dispatch gets turned over to an ambulance company and fire isn't really totally included in that process, there's a real step that could be lost, a critical step for medical service within the county. Those are my comments.
So this case you're talking about, Ben, in Potter Valley, it was fire calling off both the helicopter and the ambulance.
I can't say about an ambulance. I don't know about an ambulance.
Okay.
I can only respond to what I heard on the scanner, and that was simply it called off the air ambulance. But the point being, there's some critical judgments that get made by first responder who are trained, not necessarily medical experts, but who have significant medical training that can make that kind of decision, that are really essential for the whole process. Fire is basically the base of the entire EMS medical pyramid, and above that become the ambulance providers and then the hospitals. But fire is the real base of that pyramid. So.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I guess one thing, and it seems like it's more of a minor point now, but did you feel that the explanation you received regarding dispatching ambulance service beyond fire district boundaries, did you feel Now, not all the issues are addressed, but the concern that prompted that discussion, did you feel that that was primarily addressed?
The issue that, in terms of that, was my issue, and that was providing services outside of a taxpayer base and providing services, a gift of public funds. I felt that was satisfactorily answered to my
thank you.
issue. So,
Okay, thank you, Ben. Michael?
I'm Michael Schaefer. I'm also part of the Fire District Association through my participation in the Compton Community Services District. We're here for this to talk about dispatch. I mean, it's the big elephant in the room, and I think as Tammy Marsh Chandler said, you know, the fact that health insurance only pays for transport but not for response is the real issue. Nobody's paying for response, you know, or who is paying for response, or how do we pay for response? And as Ben was outlining, you know, most dispatch calls in the county are for medical related calls, and fire departments are there first. And they're doing the vital triage to determine whether the ground ambulance should be called back, returned to base, or whether the air ambulance should be called or returned to base. And these decisions are made, you know, every day. And if you didn't have fire responders out there, your first response in rural parts of the county could be an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's only the viability of local fire departments, volunteers for the most part, who are allowing any EMS system to exist in Mendocino County. And as we've said over months and years, you know, our system is facing some crucial problems at the moment. You know, the training requirements being imposed from the state level are such that we're now talking about a volunteer to get, you know, what is a firefighter 1 category needs approximately 500 hours of training. You know, it's very discouraging to go in as a volunteer and being told that, and then to find out that you can't do the training in Mendocino County yet. And then when you get, even if you do the training, you have to go to Santa Rosa to take each part of the test. And then you got to repeat the process if you don't get past that particular spot. So we are all, as fire agencies, coming to a real crisis. And we've been appreciative of the fact that I think we've been heard on this issue, but we are now dealing with this dispatch, which is going to potentially cause more strain in the relationship. And one of the aspects of the strain is the financial one. You know, currently, you know, and we'll get to this in your next board agenda item, but the support that the board gave fire districts in this past year from Prop 172 and Area C funding is based on a formula that is based on the amount available after dispatch costs are taken into account. And in the frame of reference for this current year, we had 4 players, 2 ambulance companies, Reach and CalStar. We know that the 2 ambulance companies, the 2 air companies have merged. So instead of getting $30,000 from each of them, there's only one $30,000 prospective payment. If you're going to go to an EOA, again, you're going to have one provider instead of 2 providers. So, you know, that on the outset is reducing the payment toward the dispatch contract as it currently has been funded, and that would reduce the amount of money left for fire districts rather than increase it when our needs are increasing. And, you know, secondly is the overall arching issue is why is the preponderance of the burden on local fire districts to pay for dispatch that doesn't really benefit them to that extent that it benefits the air ambulances and the land ambulances. So we're here because we need to find, you know, a funding solution that is proportionate to the various parties at work. I understand that the insurance companies are not going to bail us out in terms of responding, but if we don't have a viable network that allows volunteer fire departments to continue to operate, it's all going to be thrown in your laps, and it's going to be, it's in your best interest to help us survive. And we have some, volunteer departments that are down below 10 volunteers in this county, and they are stressed out. And we need help in doing the training for our volunteers. We need help in equipment. I mean, the average piece of fire equipment these days costs almost $200,000. And most of your volunteer fire agencies, that's 8 or 9 years worth of income.
Yeah.
We have some agencies, I think of Albion Little River, that just, borrowed $500,000 against their tax receipts over the next 20 years to buy 3 pieces of equipment. Not everybody can do that. They don't have the same income stream that Albion Little River does with their new parcel tax. So we have a critical situation for our departments. EMS and the dispatch contract are a very important part of it. We're fully behind, as a district association, the chiefs memorandum of understanding of 18 months ago about what they need incorporated into a dispatch contract. And because it still hasn't appeared, we don't know whether that's been honored or not. But I know that to the extent that it hasn't been honored, there's going to be a lot of conflict in terms of that EOA agreement and going forward from our point of view. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions, John?
Question, and so I'm trying to relate a lot of your comments to the actual agenda items in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so regarding the dispatch services contract, it's an unknown. You have concerns. You don't know if they've been met yet or not.
Correct.
With regard to the way, the item for EMS policies and procedures, are there specific things there that you're aware of that are a concern?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the ordinance that you adopted, we understand the basis for that. We understand the change in the law. We understand that, that ordinance needed to be passed for you to go forward with an EOA. We didn't object to your going forward in that kind of modernization, but we want you to be aware that there are implications that could directly impact our ability to be your first responders.
Well, and so the financial aspect and all that,
right.
and maintaining a volunteer base and securing the training and all that, we understand all those problems. But are there ways in which you think the EOA ordinance makes that more problematic? And so I'm not quite getting the concern. Okay, you're dispatching ambulance, but fire is the first responder most often. And so we heard concern also from, Mr. McMillan, I think, about, okay, how do we assure that fire is still there? And are those issues that are outside of the EOA ordinance, those are the systemic issues we're all aware of? Or what's the interplay there with the ordinance?
Well, I think there are the systemic things that we've been talking about for the last couple of years. But I think in relation to the agenda item and the timeline for the EOA and dispatch contracts, we've been in limbo for the better part of a year and a quarter at this point, since the previous incumbent in Ms. Chandler's position sent a letter of rescission to CAL FIRE that really set a wave of panic throughout the system. You had just adopted a dispatch contract, and then as soon as it was taking effect, a letter comes from the county to rescind it and call into question, how this whole cooperation between the medical side and the dispatch side and the volunteer fire department side was going to do it. And while I understand all the reasons for secrecy in developing the EOA proposals and the RFQs, we are concerned, and until they appear, we don't have anything tangible to say yes or no on.
And just I think the contract was not rescinded, but a notice was put out.
Yeah.
It's going to go out for an RFP.
Well, the letter, as I remember it, said that we are exercising our right of 1 year notice to potentially terminate the contract. So I think.
Yeah, for the
Go-
purpose of going out for an
RFP.
RFP. But
Right.
I'm sure we'll get a response from the director.
So, I think we've expressed these concerns in relation to the, proposal of an EOA since our formation.
So it's more, if I'm getting it correctly, it's more the uncertainty of this continued being in limbo on the issues of dispatch and the EOA process, just having that still be up in the air after quite a bit of time of reviewing it and discussing it.
That plus the fact that there's been no discussion about how that will influence funding through the formula that was adopted last year for support of fire districts.
Mm-hmm. And that's a separate item
And
today.
that's the item that's next, but that's part of the same process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call for a short break because that's my duty as chair. So we'll come back at 11. And I do want to remind my colleague and everyone that we kind of need to be out of here by when? 12:30? 12? CEO.
Chair
Angela.
Hamburg.
Move it along. You're
So we
saying.
need to move it along.
Usually 9 to 11 is usually what we do, but
Yeah,
probably
well-
no later than
Yeah,
than
now, are
12.
we going to, do we need to get into Howard's item,
The
not
encroachment?
Howard's item, but the encroachment issue? Or
That-
can we put that off until then?
That is entirely up to the
Up to
two
you,
of you.
okay.
We can put any one of these items.
Lee, I'm just looking at the clock.
I know you are, sir.
Yeah, and I'm concerned about whether we're
Just
going
let
to.
us know earlier rather
Yeah.
than later.
Well, I'm just watching the clock and I'm seeing we still have more on this issue and then we're going to get into the 172 funding issue. And I just don't see a lot of time for the encroachment
We could
permit
s-
issue. Is Howard on call?
We could contact Department of Transportation, and we could continue this item till to the next meeting, till June, if you'd like.
Yeah, I kind of think that's what we're going to need to
So-
do, and I see my
Okay.
colleague
We'll-
nodding.
we'll go ahead and
So,
contact Howard and
thank
we'll
you.
break then, if you'd like
And
that.
I'm sorry, Lee,
That's
because
fine.
I know this
I'll
is
be
something
here
you've been,
next
I have a hunch. And we will reconvene at 11 o'clock. And I'd like to recognize Chief Avila.
Chief Avila, Anderson Valley. Thank you, Dan Hamburg and John McKellen. First, I just want to talk basically on the behalf of the Chiefs Association. They have me as the representative for this this committee here, for the Public Safety Committee, and also for the Comms Committee. I'm the chair. So I wanted to talk today about dispatch. So I can't go into the details. I did have the privilege of working with Coastal Valleys on the RFP process. But I did want to bring up the concern of the chiefs in the dispatch arena. They were run parallel, and now we're hearing that they may be run together, and that could create quite a concern for the chiefs, including a lot of tactical and ripple effects that would be negative to the chiefs. So before I go too far into it, I just wanted to simply say in early 1980s, 1985, CAL FIRE took over our dispatch. They did it for free for, I believe, 1 to 2 years. And then some of our augmentation funds were flopped over to pay for dispatch. And I don't want to go into finances too much, but just to make a clear picture that, you know, the fire chiefs originally were the services that were dispatchers were being provided for. And over the years, it's slowly, you know, transitioned to more of an EMS thing. But we have been paying a bill, and we have been the core user for dispatch for quite some time. As we move further along, we're seeing that there's good reasons for Coastal Valleys and the EMS side to want to have their input in dispatch, and I can clearly see those for their reasons. My concern, and I believe a lot of the chiefs' concerns, are if we push that agenda and we don't take into considerations the effects that it will have on the chiefs, we will be dealing with some large ripple effects down the road. There are things like the logging industry, OES coordination, the way that we have a command center versus a dispatch center. We keep hearing dispatch. Those things will be major issues for us if we don't have a entity similar to CAL FIRE. Command center is huge. We typically talk about dispatch center, but we need a command center, and that is someone who is able to see the issue, delegate the resources, make in the seat calls to assist the units who are responding to things. A dispatch center simply reads the screen, and we do not want to go down that road. So anyway, just want to continue down. CAL FIRE currently does that. I believe personally, and I'm not speaking on the behalf of the chiefs at this point, but I do believe a lot of them agree with me, CAL FIRE needs to sharpen their pencil. If we can have them decrease the cost, that'd be great. But even more importantly, they need to be more effective. There's ways that we can fix some of the issues that they're dealing with. Some of the response times are too long, getting the call from the user on the phone to the troops in the field. Those things can be fixed. I believe that can be done through a quality control and oversight, a committee form, making sure they're living up to certain standards. But to completely change our dispatch is going to make a lot of ripple effects that is going to be unintended consequences that typically we, the chiefs, will end up bearing. We as chiefs don't want to see that happen. So I just want to clearly make it, stated to you folks that if we are to change that, that would make a major burden upon the chiefs, and I don't think that any of them will really, want to go down that road. So just want to clearly state that.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you.
So,
Chief Avila.
if I may,
Yeah.
the distinction between a command center and a dispatch call center, you're saying that CAL FIRE, because they have a fuller picture of the information, is better situated to dispatch appropriate resources of all types in coordination with other responders. Is that kind of the main point?
Yeah, there's a lot of folks who are in the dispatch seat who were just on an engine, say, the year prior, or they know how things work. They actually know the community. They've been in these areas, but they also understand this is what that person's dealing with. They're dealing with a TC that's over the embankment. That might incorporate ropes, or that might incorporate getting people out. They can adjust units, call for an extra ambulance. Encourage the IC, the incident commander, to, hey, do you need this? Or are you going to be wanting a second? There's things like that that can be prompted by a command center versus a dispatch center. If someone's in Fresno reading a screen, they aren't going to have that same interaction that a command center has. These folks at CAL FIRE have that capability. They bring that to the table that, in my mind, supersedes the other folks. They also have certain things that, and I can't go into details, I am a part of these RFP committees, they have certain capabilities that they bring to the table that would take away from the services currently provided. And those details are going to be the ripple effects that we, the chiefs, will end up bearing, and then, you know, so forth. We're seeing a shift from the original intent we had back in the 80s and the 90s, where the fire services were the primary user, the ones who set this up. And the EMS is starting to take over control of that, which I understand they have their obligations as well. But we need to make sure that it's mutually, looking at both issues and reflecting it so both entities are efficient. And I'm very worried that if we transition from the current command center, we're going to lose a lot of our efficiency. So,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Yes, Tammy?
I do want to take this opportunity to just clarify some of the things that you're hearing today are germane to the issue of what is the local county board's obligation for EMS. And just to reiterate again what you've heard in different ways this morning, that our obligation as a county is to assure that there's advanced life support response through ambulances. And I'm happy to go back in history and look at what happened in the 80s and 90s to the transition to EMS, but it's actually not a county obligation to pay for fire dispatch. I understand that somehow in county history those two things came together, but it is your obligation as a county board to make sure that there is an EMS dispatch that recognizes advanced life support response. And there is this effort to try to continue to have a shared dispatch process across fire and EMS. There are many counties that doesn't have. Even your neighboring county, fire districts have their separate fire dispatch agreement that is paid for by fire districts. And here in Mendocino County, countywide, aside from the city of Ukiah, your county board has allocated the funds for dispatch for fire, but that's not a model in every place, right? The one thing that we are obligated to do is EMS, and we're trying to work these things together and leverage our relationship across the two, but making sure that you meet the requirements for dispatch of EMS is the county's obligation, and to see how we partner best in terms of first response. You know, during the recession, there are other coastal counties where fire districts actually stopped providing first response services. And to the point that some of the public comment has said today, it can be devastating in terms of the support that fire provides in terms of clearing a scene and providing some additional supports that an ambulance doesn't. Ambulance dispatch will continue on. And certainly it's up to local communities to help resource how we pay for and decide in each community who responds and how it's covered. But that's not the county's obligation. And that's some of the tension you're seeing today, is to assure that the county's obligation for EMS is met.
Supervisor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I understand what the county's obligation is. However, you know, the county has always supported the fire dispatch, and I don't think anyone is proposing changing that. And also, Chief Avila and others had input into the RFP process about their concerns, and those are not publicly released yet, so we don't know the details. But do you believe that those concerns are addressed within the RFP process, so that essentially we'll still have the same response for fire as we do currently?
Yes, so I appreciate, as I came on board, there was this letter that was mentioned earlier that had gone to CAL FIRE, caused a lot of alarm and concerns. I learned about it a few months after being here, and in response partly to that letter, the fire chiefs put together this expectation document, and it is our commitment to continue to move forward with the RFP for dispatch services, and we'll fully include that document, which has been pretty public. We're happy to share with that again with your board and others that the fire chiefs put together. So during these discussions, we are committed to moving forward with a shared dispatch RFP process that acknowledges their concerns and actually memorializes it through the document that the fire chiefs put together. But I just want to take this chance to remind you that even though we're trying to do this in partnership, it is true there's this tension between making sure that EMS responsibilities are also met.
Thank you.
So any entity bidding on that RFP would have to assure that the fire district concerns that they're capable of addressing them?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, Chief.
Just want to clarify one thing. So I agree with what Tammy's saying here. The MOU, which is that document that was created, I do want to say it wasn't just the chiefs. There was Coastal Valleys was represented there. The ECC or Command Center was involved in that process, and our county radio tech, Greg Galavich. So all portions of the users, both the dispatch, the comms tech, the chiefs, and EMS were all part of it. It was very detailed, took over a year to put together, but incorporates all the needs that all the services in this county need to have in play. I would hope that you guys would make sure that is heavily intertwined into the selected entity that is going to be on that RFP process, and if it is, I think that the chiefs would be in line with it.
Yeah.
That would be the core document on how to make our decision, which I believe EMS and fire both agree with. And that would be, I think, the decision maker would be kind of pivoting on that. Thank you.
Okay.
So then if the conditions of the MOU are fulfilled, then your concerns are addressed.
Yes, I would say for me, yes. And I think the majority of the chiefs would agree with that. It's a living document that it was unanimously agreed or approved by the chiefs. And, like I said, the other folks were in it as well. So yes.
Thank you.
Anyone else care to speak? Yes, Kirk?
I'll make this brief because I know you all are thinking about getting out of here. Supervisors, Kirk Thompson, I represent Ukiah City Fire and Ukiah Valley Fire District. The dispatch RFP that going out, I understand the need to make those congruent simply because I understand there's performance standards that a potential EOA candidate will be held accountable to, and as well as dispatch will be held accountable to as far as timing and things like that. One of the key things we want to make sure, and I like to thank the CEO and Tammy, we're having a meeting at the end of this month with the City of Ukiah because we want to talk about our section of the dispatch. Technically, we don't have to choose to go with it. We were dispatched by City of Ukiah, but we chose to go with the county because it made it more seamless and it made it more effective and efficient. And we wish to continue to stay that. We're in discussions to have the county pick up that contract. And so I want to make sure that I hope that that's part of the RFP process. And we'll have that discussion hopefully later on this month and get into that depth on that. So the other thing is with the EOA performance standards, the City of Ukiah submitted previous performance standards to the RFP developer based on response times, at least for us. Our hope at the city is to make sure that the response times are equal to or greater than historical response times. Currently, it doesn't matter because there are 5 ambulances in the Ukiah Valley floor, which is a lot. But I have no illusions that once an EOA goes through, that we'll be down to maybe 2 or 3. For us to be built into that contract, we'll have to contract with somebody because once one of our fire engines goes on scene, currently one of our fire engines goes on scene, if we have to wait for an ambulance to come from Willits or Redwood Valley, that's 50% of my on-duty firefighting force taken out of service to wait for that ambulance to come. So those performance standards are very important, and I hope we have that discussion at the end of the month about making sure those are included in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk. Mr. Howard.
Well, I sat here and again, the dinosaur in the room, but I was here when we did the initial dispatch with the county. The Board of Supervisors came to the table only after kicking and screaming and saying we'll never do it. But it wasn't a giveaway on the county's part. It was a trade for some of our augmentation and how we were going to deal out with our augmentation money and what was going on. I hear the same problems today that I heard back then. Back then, ambulance didn't get a free pass on dispatch. All of them were paying for their own. They got eventually it's resolved into a bigger thing. But what I heard here today is the main thing that has been the gist of it. There's a big difference between a paid ambulance company out there and a volunteer firefighting company. Huge. They're not even, you can't even put them in the same line. And the command structure that's there needs to be sustained. There's no doubt in my mind that what they're saying about the command structure and how the dispatch works is vital to everybody here. I sat back for now quite a few years and just watched and not participated, and I don't plan to continue to participate. But if you can't see the difference, maybe you need to go out and talk to the people on the ground, and especially the volunteers, and how the dispatch works out of Howard Forest, and how, yes, the guy could have been on an engine the day before he started dispatching there. And he knows what the next need is. It isn't just to kick me through, send me another ambulance. So, and I'm surprised that the transparency isn't more defined with the ambulance. It seems like, I hope that this thing doesn't just come out and say it's time to bid. I hope that the transparency comes along and everybody sees it before it ever gets to the bid portion of it, and that everybody can have input to it. Again, it's very interesting to watch this today, and I hope that you hear loud and clear what your fire services people are saying. The simple fact that there's money to be made out there, and the fire services have never been one to be up there grabbing for it unless they deserve it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, John?
One question of Director Tammy Moss Chandler, because I believe the board previously, by approval of the contract, directed that EOAs would only be established at the direction of the board. So would that mean that the RFP would come to the board before it's approved, or only the final approval of an EOA?
I'm working very closely with the County Executive Office around the next steps and County Council for the release of the RFP process. And I know that language was added in the ordinance, so I think it's to make sure that the local, your board, was actually really involved as this rolls out. I do want to be clear that really the authority to establish an EOA is with the EMSA, was with a local board of supervisors can't establish an exclusive operating area without the approval of your EMS authority at the state level, right? It's actually approved by the state, but you wanting to implement this locally, I know you added language to our local ordinance that would assure that the local board was involved. And I can turn to Kit. I know.
Well, more than involved,
yeah.
It's like it may require the authority, but it will require the board also, is my understanding of that language that was added.
That's correct. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was recognizing the board's request that this come back to the board.
Yes.
Yeah, so it'd be both the LEMSA and the board, I believe.
So I don't have a clearly articulated process for you today of exactly how that will come, but we will make sure that it is very clear. I don't know if CO Angela wants to add.
So we have to have the approval of the Board of Supervisors, the LEMSA, right? CVEMS.
And the state.
And the state.
Yes.
All those three levels.
Correct.
Okay, for the RFP itself.
Well, I don't think we want to go out to RFP for a contracted provider for the EOA without all those approvals in place. Correct. Mm-hmm. So as you can see, that's part of our processes we're going through right now to get to actually opening both RFPs on a similar timeline.
Right. And Carmel, you didn't have a comment? No. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Tammy. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been a very robust discussion this morning, and I think we got a few things better understood. Tammy, thank you in particular for bringing some answers this morning. And Ben, thanks for coming over. Michael, thanks for coming over. Chief, thanks for coming over. And we will now move on to item 2C, which is an update on funding agreements for support of Mendocino County Fire Agencies, possible recommendations for the fiscal year 17-18 budget. And this was referred on February 7th. And Alan Flora is here to talk about it. Alan?
Good morning, Chair Hamburg, Supervisor McCowan. So as your board, I think, is already aware, the 16-17 county budget included funding for local fire agencies based on an allocation that was proposed by the Mendocino County Association or Fire District Association and then approved by the board. County staff worked through agreements with each of those agencies, and they have received payment according to the allocation formula. And so just providing that update that process has been completed at this point for fiscal year 16-17. And we're just here to address any questions you may have about that. And then if your committee wants to have any discussions about sort of proposal for 17-18, we are working on preparing the county budget, as you know, and the board has asked that this discussion come forward at our next budget workshop, which is a week from today, on the 15th. And so if your committee would like to make a recommendation to the full board, that could be accommodated at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I do support continued funding and generally at the level that we had discussed or that we included last year. But if I understand that amount, and I'm going to kind of separate out the dispatch contract because we're paying for that over and above what is distributed to the fire districts, I believe. So, we're going to continue to fund the dispatch contract, obviously. And then the formula for the districts, I think, was based on allocating to them the same percentage of relief provided through 172 for the loss of district revenues, property tax revenues. So looking at districts in general, well, looking at the county, Prop 172 provided the 46% reimbursement, if you will, for what was lost through ERAF. And then by the allocation of, I think it was 564,000 approximately, that was intended to provide the districts with 46% of what had been lost through ERAF. So that's all.
That's correct.
Now what is, so that sounds equitable based on that, but obviously every district is not situated the same. And so we do have some districts that lost nothing through the ERAF process. We have, some like Piercy that had very limited funds total, and, they did lose almost half of what their funding had been. So anyway, I don't necessarily buy that, well, we're going to give them the same percentage of what they lost through ERAF that was then recovered. But I do think that the $564,000 total has legitimacy because that's what we approved last year. So I'm comfortable making a recommendation to continue that amount, but I might have some other questions about the formula. But in general, we would want to continue that same amount. And then getting into the details a little more, I don't accept that it's equitable that some jurisdictions receive no funding based on population, but others do. So we see that for Fort Bragg and Willits, when we get to the population, or Fort Bragg and Ukiah, when we get to population, there's no consideration for the population of those areas. For Willits, I believe there is, and there's technical reasons why that was recommended by the fire districts, but I don't know that they're equitable. But then you counterbalance that with another aspect of it, and that is that cities do receive some share of Prop 172 funding, and I don't know what the numbers are, frankly, and if it would result in a positive or a negative for any particular city, but I would suggest that the populations of Fort Bragg and Ukiah be included, and then you determine, okay, what amount of money would that be? But there should be an offset for what a city receives directly from Prop 172, in my mind, because this, otherwise, they're kind of being paid twice, in a sense. And then one more thing, I would like to eliminate what I call the workaround, that we folded in CSA funds and we folded in the supposed or the guesstimated savings from the fire dispatch contract and just do away with all that, because it's all general fund money anyway on one level, although the Prop 172 money comes with restrictions. But by our agreements and the way we've sent them up, and I believe as approved by County Council, we're providing reasonable assurance that the Prop 172 restrictions are being met. So I would just have the 564 come straight out of Prop 172 and eliminate the complicated workaround involving CSA 3 and guesstimated savings from the dispatch contract. I would also support using real numbers, so for this next year I would use the actual numbers that we have and we know what they are, and each year going forward it'd be based on what the previous year's actual 172 funding had been, so that we're not having to do a true up every year.
Yeah, Alan, would you like to respond to any of these?
Well, I certainly won't argue with simplification of how the formula works and how the support is established if the board wishes to continue to do so. But I would like some clarification, Supervisor McCowan. So if you take the dispatch contract out of the discussion, the direct support that fire districts received this year was $398,000, with the exception of the city of Ukiah didn't accept theirs, so it was a little under $8,000 less. But what you seem to be suggesting is carving out the $564,000 of the Prop 172, a portion of which covered the dispatch costs, and then using all of that as direct support for fire districts which would be an increase of $167,000.
And I see I was looking at the wrong, the wrong column. So the total direct support was $398.
Yeah.
And then the rest between the 398 and the 564 was being used as part of the 648 for the dispatch.
Correct.
Right.
Right, which was also coming from the CSA the CSA funds, and you wanted that to be taken off the formula.
Yeah, because I
it's
don't
GF
think
money.
ultimately it served any purpose, because the CSA funding and the savings from the dispatch were just another way of saying general fund.
Correct, yeah. To provide the committee a little bit of clarification. In the research that we did last year, what's been referred to as CSA 3 funds, which were originally budgeted this way because they were supposed to go to support EMS services, and so that covered a portion of the dispatch contract costs. And I'd have to go back and review all the documents, but the auditor's office did some research and determined that the requirements for use of those funds no longer exist. Essentially, it's discretionary general fund property tax dollars, which can continue to be used in that manner, or could be just in budget unit 1000 as general fund discretionary dollars. So.
I think it would still make sense to show the CSA 3 as a portion of what pays for the dispatch contract, even though, really it's a distinction without a difference, but that's in keeping with the historic origin of that funding, I believe.
Yes, certainly it is, yeah.
Okay. Kirk, do you want to come up and address any of these issues, especially regarding City of Ukiah and the allocation to the City of Ukiah?
I can. To answer your question, the City of Ukiah receives roughly $42,000 to $45,000 a year on average for Prop 172 funding. But theoretically, that's been split between police and fire. But according to what the county was spending it was really only going to police and maybe some dispatch. So fire technically hasn't really received any of that money. Okay. But either way, it was being given to the City of Ukiah for the past few years, but it's only 42, and again, it's split between police and fire. Another thing on the dispatch savings, one thing to bring up is, so we're using Prop 172 funds to pay for dispatch or so, and the savings comes out of there. The ambulance companies combined, a total of 4 ambulance companies, including the flight, the air ambulances, have paid $30,000 a piece for $120,000 of that $600 and some odd $1,000 contract. Now, if you look at some of the statistics, ambulance-only calls are about over 40% of the dispatch. Mm-hmm. I do the math, and 120,000 is not over 40% of the 600 and some odd $1,000. So if we're using that calculation, we should probably charge the ambulance companies more. Yeah. On top of that, our dispatch contract, we aren't charging the ambulance companies yet. They're getting dispatched within the City of Ukiah for free. And how much did we actually collect from the 4 ambulance companies last year? Was it the 120?
I don't recall.
Because it seemed like they were seriously in arrears at one point.
There were a couple of them that hadn't been paying, so I'm not sure where we are on that.
Okay.
CalStar hadn't paid, I guess, in years. Reach was. So.
And while you're up here, Kirk, in terms of this allocation of county support, this was based on a formula that was come up with by the MCAFD.
Yes.
Right? And I believe that your agency signed on to that allocation formula.
The previous fire chief did, yes.
Okay.
And now the City of Ukiah sent a representative. The mayor is actually going to be, he wasn't able to make the last Association of Fire Districts. The City of Ukiah turned down the money in hopes to make a more united front to talk to the county about actually giving the more appropriate share and funding fire appropriately throughout the county. That was the intention, or at least that's how it was kind of relayed to me.
And what would that involve? I mentioned the issue of why exclude certain cities from the population-based portion of the distribution. Was that the intent to, let's say, correct that, or was there something more that the city was interested in?
The intent was also, from what I was told, the intent is also to correct that. The city manager has expressed to me regarding Fort Bragg and Point Arena is not technically included in there, and neither is the city of Willits, even though they're covered under fire districts, those populations.
Well,
and I wasn't part of the original formula.
I think
Willits gets funding for population, but maybe not for the city as an entity.
For the city's population, yes. Like I said, I wasn't part, and Ben can probably speak to that.
Right, but so
he could speak to how the
if I have
original
it right, City of Willits gets funded for population, but not as an entity separately.
If you would like me to address that,
yeah,
I can.
maybe we should.
Okay, Ben.
Well, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I just want to make sure you had all the information that you need.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
You can stay here, we can tag team.
Yeah,
It's
we can
okay.
tag team. That's fine. And again, the city's, sorry, the
Go,
city's
please.
intention was not to take away from the fire districts. They made that very clear when they voted not to accept the money. Their intention was not to say, we want a bigger portion of the pie that you're already giving the fire districts. We want to sit down at the table and talk about a more appropriate portion to give all the fire districts equally.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Ben McMillan,
Yeah.
Association of Fire Districts, again.
So, I may or may not have this right, but I believe that the city of Willits as an entity does not get a separate allocation, but there is an allocation for the population of the city of Willits. And then the Little Lake Fire District as an entity gets an allocation.
The city of Willits does not have a fire department, so there is no, they're, as an entity, they do not get the 2%. Little Lake Fire District covers that entire area.
Right, and Little
Okay.
Lake Fire District as an entity gets an allocation.
Which excludes the population of Willits.
No, I think.
That 6.66% excludes the population of Willits?
I'm going based upon memory right now. I don't have the paperwork in front of me. Can I see that for a second?
Right here. So it shows that the population of Little Lake is 3,900, and the population of the city of Willits is 4,828 down in the bottom of the way it's dispersed.
Population, blah, blah, blah. So, but that was.
Okay, so then there is no allocation for population of the city of Willits.
That was my
Okay.
understanding.
And there is no allocation for the city of Ukiah or the city of Fort Bragg for
Or
population.
the city of Point Arena. Point Arena is also excluded.
Correct. But then,
may I explain?
but then the city of Ukiah and city of Fort Bragg, no, city of Ukiah gets covered as an entity, right? Or
Ukiah
wrong?
Valley gets covered, but not the city.
Well, no, Ukiah City Fire District is right here for 7960.
Well, they're the 2%, but not the population base.
Can I go through the process of
Okay.
what we
What
arrived
I'm
at this
saying is
formula?
we're treating all of these differently, and
Well, actually, they're being treated the same. When we start with the process that the county, each of the special districts, excluding cities, had monies withdrawn from them as part of the ERAF process. Okay, these came back under Prop 172, this gross amount, and what was kept by the county was the monies that had been removed from the special districts. The amount of monies that had been withheld for ERAF came back, and the amount that was withheld from the cities was in fact reimbursed beginning in 1994 to the cities on a percentage that was taken away from them. Not the full amount, but the cities received the proportional amount of monies that were that.
I disagree. It was proportional. They received an allocation.
Well, I don't have that specifics, but the point being they've received some 25 years worth of payments of 172 funding. The districts had received nothing in this 20-something year period.
But as
So-
we've heard from the chief, in some cases, that money did not go to fire.
Well, just like the Prop 172 money that comes to the county.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Did not
public
go to fire.
safety. It isn't
Right.
specifically fire.
Correct. So
Well-
the formula was developed based upon the fact that the cities had, in fact, the populations of the cities had benefited from the return of these Prop 172 monies. So the remaining amount of money that was distributed among the fire agencies was the monies that had been not reimbursed to the population outside of the city limits.
But if the intent was to, let's say, refund money or to allocate money to those who had lost money through ERAF and not regained it through 172, then why are we allocating funding to districts that lost nothing to ERAF?
Because at the beginning, at the outset, we decided that each agency, regardless of what their size was, if they were city or whatever, every agency would receive a 2% funding.
But you're also providing the population funding to districts that lost nothing through ERAF.
I can't get into the exact logic that it was involved, other than it was a group discussion that lasted for about 4 months, where collectively, as a group, we decided that this was the most equitable way to deal with it.
No, you decided it was what you could agree on.
Well, that's
Well,
another way
that's
of
an
putting
important.
that.
That may not be the most equitable.
But that was an important issue
But
at
it
the
may
time,
not
as
be
I
the most
remember.
equitable.
Okay, we do need to move on.
May I?
Okay,
make
Ben,
one
you have a
addition?
little more?
Yeah, well, I do. This is yours, Kurt. I do have a comment, and that is, we as a fire group, a group of fire districts, have been trying to meet with this particular subcommittee for months and months and months. And this is not a complaint, but it is a query. We'd like to find some way to establish a routine dialogue to be able to express our points and our concerns on a routine, regular interchange basis. For example, we're dealing in a budget. We have a budget question, and we don't know who to deal with. I've talked with Alan Flora to find out if fire funding is going to be in the budget, and he says, well, and his response initially was, well, that's a board decision. We contacted you, and you indicated, well, let me check with Alan Flora. So we're in this circle, and we don't know who to respond to. In terms of EMS, we were told, well, we should be talking with Tammy. Well, but Tammy is we're in her budget, but she doesn't control us. We'd kind of like some kind of a focal point to be able to have established some kind of a routine communication. And this committee was renamed, I believe, after the ad hoc. After our meetings of the ad hoc.
The concerns of EMS and fire were folded into the portfolio of this committee.
Correct.
So, there is no ad hoc committee anymore. It is now a standing committee matter.
I understand, but how do we become a regular participant in this meeting?
I think you become a participant in this meeting when we have a referral from the board for a specific item that has to do with your concerns.
So it has to be a specific item,
such as today.
As today, okay.
Yeah.
So it's only through and how do we achieve that request to become agendized? Is that through a request to a supervisor or a request to the board?
Yeah, it can be through any supervisor, and then it's brought to the board and referred to the committee. And this committee meets every month.
Every month, I have the schedule.
Second Tuesday.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think we can consider any specific issues that come through the Board of Supervisors. That's our role.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions?
Yeah, just to maybe say the same thing slightly differently. Any member of the board may request that there be an agenda item for the full board. For this committee to take up an item, it must be referred to this committee by the full board.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Michael Schaefer, CCSD. So what I get out of hearing today is that you're going to be recommending to the full board maintenance of the current level of assessment. We recognize that it's your discretion as to the allocation formula. You don't have to adopt the one that we had last time, but we would certainly encourage you to do it in concert with us as opposed to unilaterally, because we would like to discuss the issues that you're bringing up. So if you would like to attend one of our upcoming meetings and have that discussion, we'd be more than welcome to have you.
Okay.
But as Ben was saying, we are seeking a way of interacting with you. This budget thing, which seems to be clearer today than it's ever been in the last 4 months, is very good. But it's come at a lot of frustration on our point, since we've been asking this question since December, knowing that your budget process really starts in February.
Right.
And so if there are ways in which we can do things differently in order to catch an ear appropriately, then we want to do that.
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that we have a certain cycle for consideration of the budget, and it does tend to happen toward the end of the fiscal year, and so I think it's possible that this allocation of 172 funds may become more routinized as the, but the commitment last year was a one-year commitment.
Exactly.
Now, this is a second-year commitment, and I don't hear anything from this committee indicating that we're going to go to the Board of Supervisors and recommend anything different than what you see before you. Although Supervisor McCowan may have some suggestions to make to the full board as to a different way to allocate the funds. Personally, I would stay with what I said last year, which was that the MCAFD, did the best they could to allocate these funds in an equitable way that everybody could accept. And, I think you did a pretty good job. So.
Oh, thank you.
And I would like to say that in terms of timing, we are going to be going into budget hearings next month, correct? So we kind of need to make a recommendation today. In terms of the committee interacting with anyone outside of this forum, it's prohibited by law. That's the restriction on a standing committee that an ad hoc committee doesn't have. So Supervisor Hamburg and I can only discuss this issue in an open, publicly noticed meeting of the committee.
No, I fully understand that. That was part of why we were asking, are there staff people that we should be liaisoning with to address these questions? And
I
for
think you
for example,
found them.
I know that most department heads submitted their budgets March 1st,
Yep.
and as part of their process. We were a line item in the HSA budget, and yet, there's a lot of confusion about whether that's the proper way for which us to say, are we still in for the same amount, for a greater amount, a
Yeah.
lesser amount? Where do we go from here? And, that's the kind of questions we've been asking, not knowing that you're constrained as board members by the Brown Act
Yeah.
in terms of how you can do that.
And of course, the staff people are constrained by the fact that the decision is up to the board. So, they're not going to make commitments to you.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
But I mean, you understand, here we are trying to say, we want to be seamless and involved without being irritant, and it's sort of the circumstances force us to be more irritating than we want to be.
Yeah.
And
Well, you guys are doing a pretty good job of being involved. And I'll let the comment about irritant just go by and take it as you may.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Chief?
Just want to say one quick thing.
Okay.
Just want to say that the allocations last year came in, I believe, 2 weeks ago. We received those checks. And I want to say from Anderson Valley, thank you very much for working with the association getting this together. We're a very small district, and it has actually made a large improvement in some of the things that we're going to be purchasing. So I just want to say officially on record, thank you for supporting us, and
Yeah,
we
you
look
bet.
forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I know we want to move this along. I want to ask one question because of the timing issue.
Okay.
So, and I do like real numbers, and I wondered to that end, would you support, because it would mean a one-year lag one way or the other, whether there's a gain or a loss. But if we accept the total distribution of the $398,000 for last year, and we say we want that to continue for this next fiscal year, then, I mean, that would be using, maybe that would be using real numbers, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's a place to start. I mean, there could be some adjustment, but it's based on essentially the budgeted amount of Prop 172. Now, it could be somewhat different. We aren't expecting our Prop 172 revenue to increase this next fiscal year, so there would be some connection.
So some years it could either increase or decrease, because it does fluctuate, sometimes somewhat dramatically, but maybe one way forward is to take whatever percentage the $398,000 was of the Prop 172 funding actually received, and allocate that same percentage. And I guess So that's one thing I would suggest. So we would kind of memorialize the 398,000 number as a percentage of Prop 172 funding.
Now, is that, is that different than what we did last year with the 46.6% of funds?
It is different because that 46% included the
Included dispatch.
175.
It included a portion of the dispatch.
It included some
cost.
dispatch.
So what Supervisor McCowan is suggesting would just simplify it and essentially take the dispatch
Out of it.
and it would just, we could
'Cause
sort
we're
of create
still
a new
funding the
percentage.
dispatch.
And then that would fluctuate based on actual receipts of Prop 172 moving forward, if I understand what you're suggesting.
So you'd have a percentage though, rather than the 398, you'd have what percentage 398 represents?
Correct, and if Prop 172 funding increased, the 398 number would increase.
And conversely. Michael?
So I wanted to say that there are two parts of the ambiguity that would be eliminated with that kind of proposal. One is this issue about how much the dispatch contracts are paying next year versus what they paid this year. If there was a change, then we wouldn't be held accountable for that difference. And secondly, that there was a mechanism that involved getting the figures at the end of a fiscal year on the actual cost of the dispatch contract and whether there were more savings or less savings, and whether that would adjust it, and that would be eliminated as well, so that we would be saying that the $398,000 would rise or fall only proportionally to the increase or decrease in Prop 172 funding to the county as a whole.
Correct.
Right.
And,
Okay.
I mean, I know you can only speak for yourself, but on the face of it, does that sound reasonable? And the other part of that, if we have fixed numbers to deal with, is there any reason that the funding couldn't be dispersed in the first quarter of the fiscal year?
Not that I'm aware of.
I think the delay this year was largely due to the
Contract
form of the
language.
contract and getting all that agreement.
Right.
You know, I don't think it was the intention to wait as long as it actually occurred.
If I could make one comment out on that, the only thing that I think would bear a little bit more scrutiny based on the concerns of the auditor is Prop 172 has a statutory intended use of those funds, correct? And there's a little bit more ambiguity with some of the districts, and you know, the reason we spent so much time in trying to finalize the agreements was making sure that the county did not accept liability for whether the fire agencies were using those funds appropriately or not. You know, that burden was on the fire district once the funds were given to them. So, and in our discussions with the auditor, he had a little bit more comfort in ensuring that the way we set up the agreement, but also that there's general fund dollars that are covering a portion of those. So you kind of see a little bit more flexibility in that. This proposal would essentially eliminate that flexibility there. So I would just want to have some more conversations with our auditor and make sure that the language in the agreements that we have put together, he feels like covers the county of any liability for what the fire agency may choose to spend that funding on.
So I think obviously we would want staff to review all of that, but perhaps the unambiguous agreement we have would be to continue 398,000 of funding, or whatever that percentage is, right?
Yeah.
And based on that and your understanding of where we are with receiving Prop 172 funding, which direction, if any, do you think the 398 might go for this fiscal year?
Well, the information that we've been given from our sales tax consultants is a flat Prop 172 allocation.
Much
So,
the same.
you know, and I'm not sure all the reasons for, you know, why we're not seeing increases in that. But that's where we are now. And in fact, in the budget process, the allocation for all of the other departments is flat with 16, 17. So at this point, we would expect it to stay
it'd
the same.
whatever this percentage was of the current fiscal year, then we're recommending approval of that same percentage for next fiscal year.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to actually tie it to actual numbers, we would have to go back to 15-16 receipts at this point because 16-17 isn't closed out.
When would 16-17 be closed out?
I'd have to check with the auditor. I mean, officially the accrual period is 60 days after June 30th. I'm not sure if we would have all of the receipts in hand before that or not.
I mean, my intention would be certainly to get the funds dispersed at least within the first
that would
half
be-
of the
that would be
fiscal
good,
year.
yeah.
So if we could have the most current fiscal year numbers and then still get them the money within the first half of the fiscal year in which they're allocated. So I guess we're giving vague direction to staff to.
I think for
You
what
got
we
it?
need for finishing preparation of the budget, assuming the full board agrees
Yeah.
next week, I think it's enough clarity at this time. And then you could, if you wanted to adjust the allocation formula with the association, then of course you could do that later.
And
but-
in terms of the 648, was it for the dispatch? What will that actually come out to? Do we know how much below that number? Because traditionally it's been quite a bit less.
It's been roughly 220 to 225,000 less than that.
And that
the
money
last couple of
goes
years.
to,
Well, with the way things were set up this year, that is a portion of the 398 that goes to the fire district. So
Okay.
when we created the budget, we assumed there was going to be $220,000 of savings, which would go to the fire agencies. And
so
then-
would this direction change that? Would that money then go to GF and the 398 would come directly out of 172? As a percentage?
Yes, correct, yeah. It would be more like it was historically.
Right.
Which was more.
So
of a
if the
split,
auditor
yeah.
agrees to that, then we could set that that percentage.
Right.
Okay.
And then there's just one more issue I think bears a little more examination, and maybe the distinction between a district and a company. So the districts, there's no question, they're, public entities. We have a situation in Westport where we have a fire company, but they are closely associated with the district. They get funding based on a portion of the district property tax revenue is directly allocated to support the fire company. But because we know the name, Whale Gulch is a company unassociated with any district. There's nothing to prevent residents of any rural area forming a fire district and saying, me too. And I'm really not comfortable with that. And I know that there are rural areas, there's individual ranchers, there's associations of ranchers that maintain some level of fire response on their own.
Supervisor, may I comment on that just a second?
Pardon?
May I comment on that?
You may.
As I think you remember, the reason why Whale Gulch is included is because they're one of the 22 districts.
They're not a district.
What agencies, what companies? Entities, okay, that are recognized by LAFCO. If you don't want to agree with that distinction, then it's certainly, your prerogative to say that's not what we want to do. But I'm saying that's where we came up with that, and not everybody's going to. I don't hear.
Well, the
big
level
clamor
of recognition by LAFCO would require a little more.
It's not easy to get
a little more
recognition.
elucidation for me, because I disagree that they're, quote, recognized by LAFCO in a way that puts them on the same standing as a district. But I suppose, for the sake of moving forward, I'm just raising it as an issue. I think
Right.
it does require
Yeah, I think
more.
you've raised it before.
Because what's to stop the Black Oak Fire Department from coming forward?
Right.
The Black Oak Ranch Fire Department. Why aren't they included?
Yeah. And I think there's one near Compchi also, a fire brigade.
Turtle Creek.
But I don't think Turtle Creek came before the MCAFD and asked for funding.
No,
So-
but they're mentioned in various documents reviewing the fire entities that we have here.
Okay.
I think that there's certainly lots of opportunity for future discussion of that. I just wanted to raise one more issue or tangent. You know, a year ago, you wrote a letter to us as districts talking about your proposed support for us, and for which we acknowledge and are happy to have, but what a small drop in the bucket of our unmet funding needs was.
Right.
And we look forward over the next year to find additional augmentations if possible. I know we've looked at the cannabis taxation as one way in which we might get further funding. But as opportunities arise and you see that being fulfilled, we'd certainly like to be involved in those discussions, and hope that you'll contact us to make that our presence available.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, do we need anything beyond the direction we've given?
Well,
I think
the only question I would have is, so we're planning on the 15th. Next week is the budget workshop, and so this was something that the full board had directed having a discussion at that workshop about. So is the committee okay with just kind of folding your recommendation into that agenda item, and no need to provide additional material for that meeting? Okay.
I think we're good. Okay, Tammy, you had a final comment?
I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank the CEO's office and the auditor's office, because the discussion today is germane that you'll hear as we go forward in the budget hearings, that we're working together to try to take out certain funding out of the EMS budget, and some of the concerns you heard today to make it more clear what's the EMS role and what's this additional Prop 172 funding formula that is not so specifically tied to HHSA and EMS. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tammy. Any final comments? Okay, if not, we will be adjourned at 12:05. Oops, what? Oh, I'm sorry. We do have a item 3A, approval of the minutes of April 10th. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
Direction of the chair might do it.
Thank you. By direction of the chair, those minutes are approved, and we will meet again the second Monday of June, whatever date that might be. What?
June 12th.
Pardon me?
I'm trying to think of what day that is.
On June 12th, we will be back at this room. Thank you very much.
And general public comment?
Oh, is there any general public comment? If not, we are adjourned.